demo about your lightning talk. Did you already do it?
No, I just heard it.
Okay, well, I haven't talked to him yet.
Prod him.
Yes.
What?
Gaylor,
Yes.
I'd like to do a lightning talk.
Excellent.
Yeah, there needs to be one.
Yes, I love lightning talks.
I have a good solid 10 slides ready.
Wow.
Yeah.
How about use none of those?
No, they're not.
I can do that, and I think people would probably.
I told someone else that it's his job to drive.
I can turn it.
You can send me the slides, I can pull them up. So for lightning talks, I would like to have them all on my laptop so we can cycle through them real fast.
I'll send you a link.
But you don't get 10 minutes.
Okay, in fact, I've timed it out at 4 minutes and 33 seconds.
You're spot on. Awesome. I love it. Do you have my email address?
I'm going to send it to Slack if that works for you.
Yeah, that works. I'll pull it off.
I'm going to propose a change to the metrics for DM checks.
Awesome. What change?
Adding privacy review.
Like that's just too.
All right.
Yes, the worst one.
That's a good idea.
First. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've gone over to.
I just want people that I know.
I wish.
All right. We got you down.
And the honor for
Thank you for offering the lightning talk.
Thanks for writing that.
Wait, I will have to say.
Sure, in our conversations over the past couple of days, that was really right.
I haven't
All right. So that's what the lightning talk is about, the privacy review.
The annual, yes, I know what title mine is. No, I will not
An important thing
abuse.
to have important more
Yes, I know what phishing is.
I really like that idea.
Yeah.
I look forward to.
Offer my credit card to Nigerian princes.
I think the important thing is just surfacing that as a topic.
Actually teach you not to.
No, I think we have a really good audience for it.
From vertical.
Is anybody here?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Figured I shouldn't take a backseat so that folks will come in here.
Waiting for the comfort to descend.
I like this table.
Do we have the copy of it? I heard there's a copy of mine.
Oh,
I got yours.
I got a copy from you.
There will be coffee soon.
Okay.
They said 9, but I just looked and I didn't see it yet.
Well, it is almost 9, so I always like to start on time. And if we start a little earlier, like 10, no, it is 9. So then we'll have some time for coffee in a little bit. Do I need to do anything for the live stream, microphone? It's all working, all set up?
Should we leave the doors open for ventilation or?
Yeah.
Don't forget we need a head count.
Yep. At the end of my little welcome, I'll ask and get a head count. So as people trickle in, they get a chance to be included. So I welcome all of you to join us today for CHAOSScon. I appreciate that you have the lens.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that you're all coming here in person and joining us online on the live feed. Speaking for myself, I was super nervous to travel again, and I'm really happy that you all are doing the leap of faith that we can do this again, that with the right measures in place, we can prove that we can come back in person. And so thank you all for coming, and to the Linux Foundation for making this possible and implementing the right procedures. And thank you everyone online who is joining us. So just thank you. We have amazing sponsors, and I want to thank the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation and Google for being our silver sponsors, and Bitergia and Red Hat for being our bronze sponsors. throughout the event, because we are in person and we are online, please go on Slack, ask questions on Slack. That way everyone has the same chance of asking questions. And even for the in-person speakers, if you would please post your questions on Slack, then I will ask the questions based on everything that was posted online. That way, really, we are trying to be inclusive to everyone who is participating in the event, online and in person. There is a CHAOSScon Slack channel. So this QR code, if you're here in person with the camera, will be the invite to join the Slack, and then you have to find the right CHAOSScon Slack.
Which Slack workspace?
There is a CHAOSScon channel within the Chaos Slack. So maybe someone can post the CHAOSScon handle in the general. We'll figure it out somehow. For today, I want you to think about metrics, people, and chaos. Whether you are a user, developer, or a foundation, we all care about the health of open source ecosystems, open source communities, and we need to figure out what it is that makes open source sustainable, inclusive, and effective. And for that, we need to understand community health, and we do this through metrics, with people, and here in the CHAOSS community. Let's start with metrics. Metrics is more than just data. Metrics helps us get insights. And Sarah Novotny yesterday during her keynote highlighted that we humans are really great storytellers, but that if we don't talk to each other, if we don't get the feedback from others, if we don't look at the data, then we come up with really strange stories or tell the wrong stories. And we all learned this back in 2014 when Heartbleed shook the world because we didn't understand the health of this critical open source infrastructure project. And so that is where we all in open source came together and said, okay, we need to understand the health of our projects, of our communities. And in 2017, this is how chaos started, because there was so much energy going into the direction of understanding community health through metrics that we said, okay, let's bring together the ecosystem, let's start the CHAOSS project and figure this out together. And we believed from the beginning that we need to have this dialogue and be very open and transparent and inclusive about it. So we had several events over the years with events like this CHAOSScon. We have a podcast where we elevate use case and experiences with measuring community health. And we are about bringing people together. And some of this work, there's a lot more going on, but some of this work is defining metrics. And so next week, we will be releasing next version of our metrics. We have already defined 70 metrics. That is something to celebrate. Across 5 working groups and 22 focus areas, we have defined 70 metrics with more than 130 people who have been involved in the process. So many of you here in the room and online have been participating. So thank you so much for all of the hard work. Really, it's been amazing. I also want you to think about people. Open source communities depend on people, and healthy communities can only exist if we have really good people who like to be in the community and working together. But how do we create those healthy communities? What is the secret to doing that? And we have been discussing this from day one in the CHAOSS project, that diversity, equity, and inclusion is important. And we have been investing in people. And I want to give you an example. I want to show you what this can look like in the CHAOSS project specifically. I want to highlight Shoya's involvement. Shoya is a graduate student at ECNU in Shanghai. She joined the CHAOSS community through our mentorship program in partnership with the Google Season of Docs last year. And she helped write the handbook for our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion badge. From there, she continued to be engaged, helping to launch the Asia Pacific calls. She has been involved in organizing the Shanghai meetup for CHAOSS, bringing together the local community there. And she's been really instrumental in translating our metrics into Chinese. And also she joined as a panelist for CHAOSScon to bring in new perspectives as we're elevating stories about measuring community health. So Shoya is a great example for what can happen when you really invest in people and build an inclusive community. And this is just one of many stories in the CHAOSS community. Over the last few years, we have done 24 successful mentorships. And I just want to thank everyone in the community who has been involved in being so welcoming, responsive to these students, mentoring them, helping them understand open source, and bringing them into the community. This is only possible because of all of you. So thank you very much again. And so we have already accomplished a lot in the CHAOSS project. And the third thing for today that I want you to think about is, what do we want to do next as a CHAOSS community? What are you interested in working together with others in the CHAOSS community? There are some things we've already started working on. We are really good at defining metrics. We have the process down. Just over the last summer, we had Google Summer of Code students who really helped streamline the process. So I think it is time to move on to more challenging problems. We've started talking about metric models. How do we bring different metrics together for specific use cases? Maybe we can write some guidebooks saying step by step, here, this is the problem some people face. Here's how you start getting the metrics. And then what do you actually do when you see metrics going up or down? Another conversation we've already started is around ethics. What are the ethics around collecting data, measuring communities, having information about contributors? And again, that's one of the conversations that I invite you to join. What are other things we can do? Maybe it is time to start compiling data sets and providing quality data for researchers, for institutions to learn about community health, having some baselines. Maybe we can move on to having an identity data set for contributors in an ethical way where contributors can opt in, and then we can provide better data with that information. Maybe the CHAOSS project can branch out and forge new partnerships with other communities to bring in conversations and share what's happening here. And how do we ensure that when someone says they're using CHAOSS metrics or CHAOSS methods, that they're actually doing it properly? Do we need a certification program? There's a lot of conversations that we can have, and maybe you have other ideas for what you want to do in the CHAOSS project moving forward. So for today, think about metrics to understand community health. Think about the people like Shoya that make up healthy communities. And where do we want to go next as a CHAOSS project? A few announcements. We have a code of conduct. Please be nice to each other. If there is any concerns, please let me know. There are also others. If you go to the code of conduct, there's a mailing list you can report issues to. Because we are in person and live online, if you please use the Slack channel to ask questions and have conversations, that way everyone gets included. The slides are online on our schedule. We are also taking pictures and videos thank you, Elizabeth, for being our photographer today. If you don't want your picture, please let me or Elizabeth know. We're happy to make sure that you're not in any of those pictures. There are lightning talks after the second break, and if you have something you just want to talk about for 3-4 minutes, let me know. Happy to add you. You don't need any slides. If you have a slide or 2 or 10 and you can do it in 4.5 minutes, happy to include you during that session. And then questions are loved. Show the speakers your love by asking questions, or just in general, be engaged today. And then after the event, Amy, thank you for helping organize this. We want to get together for those who are still around and maybe have some lunch. Amy, do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so we found a few different lunch options that will be order yourself so that everyone can just pay for themselves and make it easier. We've got everything from vegan options, seafood, Japanese, and Turkish. So we'll have lots of options. You can go where you want, grab friends. And then afterwards, we're thinking about doing the underground tour of Seattle at 3 o'clock. The website is undergroundtour.com. There is 41 open tickets, which is perfect for us if everyone, even if everyone wanted to go. At 3 o'clock, we were thinking was a good time so people could eat, go on the tour, and then have the rest of the afternoon and the evening to themselves. So we just need like a show of hands who's interested. Like I said, everyone will just buy their own tickets. Is 3 o'clock good for everyone?
So 3 o'clock underground tour. Who would be interested in going?
And the website is undergroundtour.com. It is Bill's Beatles Underground Tour, so that you know that you're on the right site. Like I said, 3 o'clock has 41 openings, so I think that's a good option for everyone.
So did I understand that correctly? Everyone books their own ticket.
Yes.
So if you can maybe put the link in the CHAOSScon channel so we can all find it, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Amy, do you know how long that lasts?
75 minutes. I did look that up just now.
75 minutes. All right. With that, it is time to make room for our keynote speaker. Elizabeth, this is your laptop. You know how to open her. Unfortunately, she is not here. Emma Irwin has been really instrumental in getting the Chaos project started 4 years ago, and I'm super excited to hear. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah.
Okay.
Super excited to see. Here, we can mirror the displays
Oh, yeah,
again.
yeah. Thanks. Nobody look at my desktop, okay? Because it's super messy. And I can't read this because I'm old. My eyes don't. This one.
And that's the direct link to the 3 o'clock, hopefully.
Are we ready to start her? Is that good? Are we good?
Yep,
Okay.
we're good.
Hi there.
Maybe.
Yes, hello. Welcome to my talk titled All of the People, All of
Yeah,
the
I don't know how to
Time
do that.
to kick off CHAOSScon.
No,
I'm really
hold on.
excited to be here today. Also, even though is the day that I'm speaking, the day that you're listening. That said, I'm going to be in the chat channels and would love to get your questions and feedback, and I'd also especially love to learn from your experiences on this topic.
It's all the way up on here.
And
too.
again, I'm just really excited to kick off CHAOSScon. I have deep admiration for the chaos and this chaos community and the work that we're doing, especially around people.
There we go.
So I
Now it
hope
might
that
blast y'all
your
out.
time
I'm
spent
sorry if it
listening
does.
to me inspires even more work in some way.
Okay,
So,
wait.
hi, yeah, my name is
we're gonna
Emma
start over.
Irwin. I work on
Thanks, everybody,
Microsoft's
for your
Open Source Programs
patience.
Office.
Go back.
I
There you
live
go.
in beautiful British Columbia on Vancouver Island on the land, the unceded territory of the Sauk First Nation. Yes, hello. And before I get into some of the topic area, the substance of my talk, I wanted And before I get into some of the topic area of the substance of my talk, I wanted to give a bit of background that led to it, that inspired me to think about this particular topic. So recently I went on vacation, which normally wouldn't be such a big statement, but after months and months of kind of being in the area that I live with COVID, I think many of you can relate to the fact that that's a pretty big deal. And so I took my family to the interior of British Columbia, just on the border of Alberta in Canada, near, and in the middle actually, of the Rocky Mountains. So this area is really vast and wild and open and beautiful, and was different than where we live by the coast. So we wanted to learn as much as possible and experience anything, including history. And one of the things became clearly obvious after a while was the important role of the CN Railway in this area, and especially just by the number of trains that we saw go by on our trip and as we were driving. And if you're not familiar with the CN Railway, that's the train line that actually was built from one side of Canada in the Atlantic to the Pacific coast in Vancouver. So a really big accomplishment that allowed a lot of trade and travel. And that's pretty unlikely. And what was so interesting in this area, and it was one of the kind of claims to fame, if you will, around architecture of this type, was that the railway had to go through these rugged passes of mountain where ice and snow collect. And in fact, tunnels were bored through mountains to make sure that the train could pass. And so with this in mind, we decided to learn more about trains. I mean, why not? It's not something that I knew a lot about, except for having seen them along the roadway. We decided to go and check out a train museum. And it was really cool. Honestly, you can see that this museum had trains inside of it. It was meticulously looked after. The machinery was polished and beautiful, and it was really magnificent to stand up against some of these testaments to human achievement. And then to also experience the culture side of passenger trains, which you could walk through actually and kind of imagine what it would be like sipping tea and looking out the window as the mountains went by. It was really, really impressive and really interesting. And then, but what caught my eye was something actually kind of at the back of the museum. It's sort of like this passageway that you have to walk through to get to the passenger cars to continue the exploring of the machinery. Was these two framed photos, and I just have one here, I can find the other photo, but there's two framed photos that actually told the story of the builders. So the people that built the train tracks, the tools and the machinery that made it possible to go through mountains. Of course, if you know if you've heard any of this story before, you know that, to put it lightly, the story of the builders is also an uncomfortable one that includes the human cost and among others. So, and it also told the story of different types of empowerment between people, different access to tools and nutrition that made this actually a real story of sacrifice for all of the shiny accomplishments that we've seen so far. And I started to think, when I learn something new, I often just find myself thinking about how I can apply an insight or something I've learned to the work that I do every day, especially thinking about people and technology. And I thought, yeah, like we do this in technology all the time and have the same kind of history, is somewhat parallel, in that we love to talk about and share the stories of what things we've built can do, how beautiful they are, how we can enjoy them, and how they change users' lives. Often great stories on their own. But the builders tend to be a footnote, if not invisible, a release note. Just tell the story of the builders, and by builders, by the way, I don't mean, it's not meant to be specifically engineers, I mean all the different people and all the different skill sets that result in the technology that we build. But to tell the story of everyone has also at times been uncomfortable and sometimes hidden away. And that's it. I think that open source is actually an area where those stories have been forefront for a very long time. We have been able to focus on stories of the builders simply that working open has made it possible, that being in a community and a contributor, and through acts of bravery, I might add, and through acts of bravery and just pure will to change the system, people have told their stories. And we've been very fortunate for that, because these stories have helped us start to see change happen and start to create a shift. And I think CHAOSS is one of the special places making a difference in that area, because we're looking at it, the CHAOSS project is looking at it so systemically, right? One-time changes won't make as big a difference as thinking systemically about change. And so we owe a lot of gratitude to the people who've told those stories and made the stories of building software so visible and so central in the longer term stories. And that said, I think that still that focus is being from the perspective of people in communities and people and contributors. And that the story of internal culture is still a little bit hidden away. And so what I propose is, or maybe not hidden away, but more like it's not prioritized as much. We don't talk about it as much. I think it's the people internally working on open source is still a bit of a footnote when we talk about technology. So what I propose as a next step, and we'll share some of the things that we've been doing at Microsoft, is to focus our accountability on the experiences and impact of people working on open source inside our organizations. That thinking more holistically about how our culture internally impacts our communities and products externally is really important, if not critical, to kind of creating that holistic view where we get to building more inclusive and safe spaces for everyone. So here's a photo of some folks from Mozilla, from my time at Mozilla, where this group includes employees. It includes contributors, interns, and others. There's a couple faces I don't recognize there. But as you might intuitively know, the empowerment, the inclusiveness, the behaviors of one group being community or contributors or staff, will directly have impact on the other. You can't have an empowered culture in open source without thinking about and designing inclusively for both. And another example or another photo I'll share with you is a KubeCon. This is a photo taken from 2019, and which I think, just looking at it, I imagine that there's lots of companies here, academics, students, government representatives, and I think maybe a few other groups as well. I'm sure that there's actually endless to try and categorize. But the point is that, if we're just thinking inclusively and designing empowerment for one group, that doesn't necessarily mean that we can ignore the other. So we need to think holistically. The success of every individual, of every company and community is dependent on the other, and vice versa. And if you like numbers, here's a number. 40% of the 100 starred projects, top 100 starred projects on GitHub, were released by a company. So I think that's really interesting. So that means that, nearly half of the projects were released by people working for a company or organization. And then I start to ask myself, I wonder what that was like. What were their experiences releasing open source? Did they feel ready? Did they know how to work with open source communities? What was the experience of the open source community engaging with those folks? How well was everyone set up for success? And I hope you're starting to see that why I think it's important to focus on that internal culture as part of the bigger plan and opportunity. And when I think about building blocks for healthy culture inside an organization, I think about these four areas. These are largely based on the Culture Code, which is a book I suggest reading. Also, if you're in the chat and you have other books that you think people should read, or talks, or presentations, TikToks, whatever, I'd love to hear some of your suggestions as well. And this is also just based on my experiences over the years building culture inside and outside of organizations. So belonging is really about, as far as open source goes, in the context of open source, is really about making sure that people feel like they belong to something inside of an organization that matters to the organization, and that thing is open source. If people work in open source and they don't feel like that matters to the organization, or that it's just something that people say they care about, then that's a lot different. It's also really important to make sure that people feel that they belong to the bigger opportunity of open source and solving some of the world's biggest problems. Belonging is really important. Enablement empowerment maybe seems a little bit obvious, but I just want to emphasize that this is from both a psychological standpoint, meaning that people feel that companies have their backs, that they're empowered to experiment and to learn, and that they also, from a tooling perspective, have the tools, the processes, the support, and policy to make them successful, so that they believe it and that they can do it. The third is around purpose. So I know that, especially working inside of organizations, we're thinking about our careers and helping people think about the bigger purpose of working open source as it connects with their career goals, whether that's like building a specific skill set, growing into a role of leadership, or just having impact in innovation in some way. Being able to personally connect that purpose to something bigger than ourselves is I think a big part of why I'm in open source, and love to try and give that to others. And then of course, centrally is accountability and trust. Trust is something that we build within our organization, and people feel empowered, that they belong and have purpose, and accountability is a thing that we all need to have for each other that makes that possible. So these are the building blocks that I think about whenever I'm building programs or talking to people, and often where you'll find you might find some challenges for people. And you may ask yourself, who are the people to think about when you're designing this? And whenever I come to this slide, I always have that talking head song. You may ask yourself, I wish I could figure out a way to have a soundtrack, because that would be the soundtrack, talking heads to this. But anyways, who are the people we think about? Well, and part of this question might be coming from the fact that you're like, well, you work at a company with thousands of engineers, and that's true. Or you might be saying, I work at a startup, or within an academic institution. I've also worked in those types of organizations, and I'll just say there's still similar types of roles and challenges that people face, no matter the size of the organization, no matter the maturity level of a project or team. There's going to be similar kind of trends that you can think about. And I'll share with you some of those that I think about, and the types of things that we're doing at Microsoft that maybe you can learn from. So the first is to think about those in community-facing roles. So by community-facing role, I mean people in roles that in any way interact with somebody that's not a teammate or working in a company. That could be someone who writes a blog post on behalf of your company. That can be somebody who's releasing code, releasing open educational resources, commenting on an issue, testing a pull request. There's just so many ways. If the act of their job puts them in front of people who do not work for you, then that is a community-facing role, although of course there's much bigger scale for some folks who are community managers or are open source maintainers. And the risk of bringing people into these roles without ensuring that they understand what their empowerment looks like, and without the trust that you have their back, is that they, people might endure, and I know that this has happened in companies and organizations, that people feel that being a community manager means that you have to put up with negative behaviors as part of their role, which is not true. If the company, which is not true, nor should it be, that enforcing the code of conduct is something that they have to figure out, which should never be true, right? An organization should have support set up to support to make sure that no one is handling difficult behaviors alone. You may also have people that don't understand their accountability for inclusion, things like using inclusive language and thinking about diverse perspectives, or how to build inclusive spaces. So all of these things can be, just deficits in what people know. Their intentions might be really good. Kim Creighton, whose educational series on racism is really, really good. If you get a chance, I highly recommend her. She has a great quote which says, "Intention without strategy is chaos." And I think that's really true for those in community-facing roles. You might have really good intentions, but without support from the organization, without designed structure and supportive resources, it can really literally be chaos. And so one of the ways that we try and support, or that we're being strategic in avoiding that chaos, is to provide training to everyone in community-facing roles. And this is like, think of it like a first aid course for creating healthy and inclusive communities. It's not the paramedic level, it's not like everything you need to know, but the basics of what people need to know to be successful and to trust the organization has their back. So that basically covers things like HR resources, encouragement to take breaks when you need them, understanding of how to escalate if they're experiencing behaviors that make them feel uncomfortable, unwelcome, or challenged, and also other kind of policy and gotchas that make sure that data classification is invoked to protect people's privacy. So that's something that we embed, and it's really, really, not only is it helpful to people, but it also gets people asking the right kinds of questions about building inclusive communities and chatting with each other. The other category of people that we think about is, probably not surprisingly, those using and releasing open source software. And this is, again, think about the block of empowerment, making sure that they have the tools, first of all, they understand, a basic understanding of compliance and tooling and security, but also that we have tools set up to support their success. So that empowerment is very squarely in the tooling space here. And I'll share with you a couple of ways that we empower engineers and others releasing and using open source. The first, I can't show you all the steps of a wizard, but this is the main page for our Github Wizard, which walks people through the process of creating a new open source project on GitHub. It's not just a matter of creating a repository, but the steps also trigger business review, including license and other policies. So this is being set up to reduce friction for engineering practices, just to make sure that they can follow a series of steps. They don't need to worry about who needs to be involved, because they'll be automatically brought in. And by the time that they click the button to release publicly, that they'll know that that they have been fully compliant. And this takes the worry away for a lot of people, that they don't have to ask a bunch of questions or worry that they've done something wrong, because they've had kind of sign off from the folks that are involved. We also have something called component governance, which reviews Microsoft usage, detects what open source people are using, and lets people know what information about that project they need to know, including vulnerabilities. So I'm going to give you a quick demo of component governance.
At Microsoft, it's crucial for our developers to be able to manage their open source compliance. The main tool that we use to achieve that is called component governance. Component governance is an internally developed Azure DevOps extension where teams can register and view their open source usage. As most Microsoft employees work in an Azure DevOps ecosystem, it's crucial that our compliance systems are easy to use and meet developers where they work. Component governance uses a build tab to automatically injected into most Azure pipelines at Microsoft to detect what open source the team is using. This build path then sends that information up to the component governance service for what we call registration. The results from that build task process appear in Google's components view, which allows teams to review the components that they're using, as well as information such as when they started using it. Component governance supports many popular package managers such as npm, NuGet, pip, and Go. To keep teams secure, the system also calls out publicly available vulnerability datasets such as GitHub advisories to look for known vulnerabilities associated with the component. Those vulnerabilities appear as alerts in the main component governance alert view. This gives teams a centralized view of any potential risk to their repo. Alerts contain information such as the name, the description, the severity, discovery date, and in many cases, recommendations for resolution. Component governance also maintains a set of custom licensing rules that have been developed in partnership with legal to alert on any component that may be legally risky. These appear in the UI as legal alerts. The most common type of legal alert is that a component needs to be reviewed further by Microsoft's legal team. Component governance knows how to take the team's repo information and kick off that review process, which also takes place in an Azure DevOps environment. Finally, with the legal information that component governance already has, we can generate a notice file for teams to include in a release. That's component governance. It's how Microsoft teams manage their security and legal open source risk in a way that is closely tied to their daily work environment.
And there you go. So component governance is a great example of reducing engineering friction and also helping educate people as part of that on what it looks like vulnerabilities in open source projects and how we might contribute as well to helping solve those.
At my cool Azure DevOps extension,
Sorry, I'm gonna have to.
teams can pump employees.
There we go. So another group that we think about is maybe also not surprisingly, but our goal is to try and increase the people who identify as being a contributor to open source or on behalf of your organization. So it's not unusual to release or use open source, but encouraging people to think about contribution as part of their role in open source is really important. But of course, there's lots of legal questions there as well. You know, what can I do? What can I say? And as well as a lot of confidence issues. So sometimes people, and this is really common in open source generally, feel that they're not perfect enough or that they might not represent their company well enough. And so myth busting some of the ideas of what it means to work openly is really important. Some of the ways that we handle that are to have really honest discussions about what it means to be to make meaningful contributions in open source, and especially using the term chopping wood and carrying water. I think most people are familiar with that, kind of helping with the non-glamorous work of open source, and the CNCF actually has an award around it. So we encourage people, at least initially, to think about how they can help projects with some of those non-glamorous tasks that actually are most important in maintaining a project. We also have something called a contribution business review, which is when people encounter a CLA or have bigger questions about contributing something like a feature extension, that we can trigger a business review process again, just to make sure that everything is fine on their end and they don't need to worry at all. So not worrying is definitely a theme in a lot of our business review work. Contributing to open source is also a criteria for voting in our Foss fund, which is, I'll get to in the next slide, but Microsoft gives away $10,000 every month as one of the many ways that we try and give back to open source. And in order for people to vote on a project for this funding, they have to contribute to open source. So we're trying to encourage people to do that. And we've created this resource. This is available on Microsoft/Foss-fund to help people think about how to just get started. So there's information here about the Good First Bug, that opening an issue is a contribution, documentation and writing, diversity and inclusion. And sometimes this points out to some people that they've been contributing to open source all along with their on a board or that sort of thing. So we have this really easy resource to help people unblock themselves if they're not sure. And yeah, so I mentioned the Microsoft Foss Fund. As of this moment, we've sponsored 20 projects in the last year or so. This is a way that we help our employees help give back as the nominations come from our employees and are based on projects that they use and care about. We more recently have added diversity inclusion as a reason that people can, a project that is working on diversity inclusion as another criteria for people nominating. And finally, actually not finally, but the second last category of person that I think about is people who are new to Microsoft or new to open source. They may not be new to Microsoft, but they might be new to open source, or they're new to both of those things. And specifically, we think about onboarding, meeting people at the door at the beginning and helping them understand a lot of things we just talked about. And so we're starting to onboard or embed onboarding in existing programs. So open source onboarding is not separate, but we're trying to work with teams that are already doing this and meeting people as they come in the door, so they have a very basic understanding of who the community is, what the tools are, and most importantly, how to ask later when they've had a chance to kind of orient themselves. So the first thing that we do is, as I mentioned, is we introduce people to the concept that there is a community inside of Microsoft that exists and they are warmly welcomed. This is also on the main page of open.microsoft.com. If you want to watch the faces flash by, there's some cool animation there, all linked to people's GitHub repositories. So just letting people know that they are part of the community, and then that there's touch points for ongoing touch points. So it's not just faces on a website, but there's meetups where we get together. There's a newsletter that shares the accomplishments, the releases, the inspiring stories. Shout-outs are a big part of our newsletter. We want to highlight the good work that people are doing, contributing, and in the ecosystem. We also have, of course, chat channels, which most people do, but where to find us, and something called the Open Source Champs program, which is basically membership of people who self-select to help others, which is really great. Expert leaders who are ready to help people avoid pitfalls and connect with some of the tools and resources and policy that will make them successful. So community touch points. And then training is a big part of things. So, but not just training, collaborative learning. So we have a series of workshops that we run called Open Source Maintainer Workshop Series. This is for people onboarding from Microsoft, but as an ongoing weekly offering. We do about a 20-minute presentation on each of these subjects, and then we have breakout rooms with activities because we heard that people really wanted to meet each other more, which makes sense with COVID and being stuck at home. So we try to get people meeting and talking about some of the problems they're working on as part of these workshops. And we also have all of this, we pull all of this together in a GitHub project board where because we know as people are coming into things, there's the fire hose, and we don't want people to have to check back to some list or some chat. So we have this GitHub for open source at Microsoft project board where there's first steps, which are kind of really important and really mostly around the community touch points. Second steps, there's specific training that we encourage people to take, including the code of conduct one that I mentioned is really important, and so on. The idea is that people can move their tasks over to the done column, which you can't quite see here because the screen isn't wide enough, and can also have conversations with their managers about the types of things they've done. All training is recorded in our learning system, so as well, people can show their accomplishments. And speaking of managers and manager discussions, there's also definitely a group of people, if not everyone, who wants to make sure that the things that they're doing in open source as part of their role connects to the things their managers expect of them. That they have the words to, pitch how open source works. It's not just being able to describe why, but to pitch that, we should do this more, and this is why it matters. But it's a very common question to get. I don't know how to draw the line between this and the things that my team might be doing and my project might be doing. And so the answer to this, one of the ways we've answered this is to create Again, a bit more training. This is a self-study course called Mapping Your Open Source Career. I worked with HR career development experts to create a resource that people can, first of all, meet others, inspiring people across the organization through storytelling. We have to produce some videos for that. And also just to walk through the steps to document the things that they want to accomplish in their career and how they think open source can help them. And then there's a form, not a form, but a worksheet that they fill out and work on with their manager. So the idea is by the end of this course and the end of the activities associated with this course, they're able to have those conversations with their manager, and there's real clarity between teams and each other about what that means. So this is one of my more favorite resources that we created. So to kind of wrap it all up as best I can, I think that creating a sense of belonging in your organization around open source is really critical part of building culture. Empowering those people by reducing friction in the engineering process and providing opportunities to learn and grow. Learn and grow is really central to that. And connecting people with each other and a purpose around open source will create that accountability and trust that really has the chance to accelerate the ecosystem to get where we need to be, to make our projects and communities truly a reflection of our end goal. To basically get into the story of the builders, to make sure this is lovely as the story as what they built. So that's my talk. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Emma. Emma is in the Slack channel, so if you all can go there, ask questions. We now have a 5-minute break. There is coffee in room 304. And then in 5 minutes, we will continue with Why We Join and Why We Leave Open Source Communities by Kevin and Elizabeth. So see you in 5 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
I forgot to turn my Slack notifications off, so those were going
Oh my
up
gosh.
here.
Yeah, I heard that. I'm
I
sorry.
was like, oh no.
So like when you started the video and it didn't have sound, I realized I was still monitoring my mic.
Yeah.
This mic, I was
Yes.
monitoring it, but it was coming up in the system audio.
Okay.
So then like I had both my audio and the system audio playing, and I couldn't turn off the monitor on the mic unless I changed channels.
Oh no.
So I'm just gonna have to sync it up with the video. So,
Okay.
that way we can also have the crowd in there too.
This is for the recording you're talking
Yeah,
about.
so like whenever you play a virtual video, I'm gonna need like an explicit do
Okay,
one, and then we'll start at the exact same time.
Okay.
I am so sorry I put your Slack up there.
No,
but
it's totally fine. I was waiting for it to pop up, and I was like, oh god.
I was able to clutch it. I was able to get it on clutch. Basically, people were like, "Wait, there's something wrong" on the chat, and I'm like, at the same time, I'm trying to fix it. So what I did was I played at a certain point with the audio output off.
Okay.
And then I started it right when she said those words on here.
Okay,
So then I
okay.
synced it up. I was so lucky to get it the
Perfect.
first
Okay,
time. So
awesome.
I'll try to avoid that in the future.
Okay.
Oh. I just realized I was right next to the mic talking about all that. That's all good.
So I'm part of the work on diversity, and generally, we want to and so we want to enable anyone who wants to run open source on the cloud to run successfully. You know what I mean? And we've done a bunch of work to make sure that our cloud is so
What's that?
I'm gonna go get some coffee real quick.
Yeah.
Do you want to use your laptop or this one?
Let's just use yours since you already have it, right?
Yep.
So.
Kevin, you forced the question change. I edited the schedule this morning.
That's why there was a conflict. So okay. So then I edited the PDF.
I couldn't say. Yeah, we're yeah, absolutely. And we've made it really, pretty good. And, there's a bunch of guys who
I just pushed that out.
Yeah,
we kind of had a later mover. So started.
Yeah, sorry.
I don't know. Let's do it over again.
So what I want to do is
And so we've done some things like
remove phrases. Group picture.
That sounds good. Yeah, just ping me.
The lightning talks at the beginning of the last session.
And then,
you should be
non-formal.
Can you do it real quick?
So,
Well, I need to adjust all the time. So
this started talking about this with reports out
during the next
I'm
gonna get
I think
are you presenting from here?
we're actually
Pull up the slides or
so we don't need a key, so we don't need a graphic. Literally say I am ready to follow the so we don't do anything like that. I love the only no question. No. Yeah. And they started off the E-file. Yeah, the company went like they were private. They were private for a while, like not venture back.
I've got my kids there, so it was kind of like.
But if you run a couple of you the economic model for all of the enterprise editions. Yeah, I mean, we did really well. It was like, yeah. We're trying to break away from so, one is to scale. So, we don't we also offer virtual machines. Which is not a bad concept. So, we have a virtual machine in a particular amount of space. And then you have to scale it. One of the things we do is what we call flexible. So, you set up a virtual machine with one CPU. And then you scale that to 2 or most clouds. You can scale to 2 or 16 or multiple. We let you scale to, one word, other CPU, effectively and any amount of memory based on what you think the optimal shape is for your workload. But ultimately, all of these are, these are kind of how we can keep some of the other skills. And part of it is, as we do a lot of large enterprises, trying to figure out what it is. We're forming, oh, well, we've got this monolithic, your Caterpillar tractor.
Hey, our pretty good t-shirt.
Our customers are not always the same.
Have a queue today?
Yeah.
They like
What's that? No, I'm not going to. It must have. Does that thing go to sleep?
They're just like in the.
And then I'll walk over to the train and we're back.
What Oracle's doing to.
No, I don't think so either. And actually, I talked to Kevin about some of the data too, how we can
Cloud or
put that together.
helping,
I'll stay out of your way.
No, no, no,
Yeah.
that's fine. Do you want a t-shirt? You're a guy.
Sure.
Yeah, I guess not coming back on.
I not super familiar.
I looked back.
I wonder if it's something on your.
If there is one, I looked at it.
Oh, is it your video? Oh, I'll stay out of it.
See, I don't. Elizabeth, do you want? No. It looks like your laptop just doesn't detect it.
No, he has
Kevin, we might have to use yours because mine's not detecting the input.
I think I need some more. I got it.
That's why I wanted it. Yeah. We've been trying to figure out what a good show was.
When did it stop working?
When we plugged it back in, it didn't come
Why did we were we using a different computer
Elizabeth
for?
doesn't want to show her messy desktop.
Yeah, exactly. No, I shouldn't have unplugged
Who did
it.
we use your
Was
computer
Elizabeth.
for?
No, this has been, we've been using mine.
It's this.
Do we want to try plugging it into the
Oh,
other
did we plug this one in recently?
No. The only thing I unplugged was this one. That's just my power. The one you have is my power.
Well, a lot of things out there are.
Did you get a t-shirt?
They're unisex.
And I think that if we had been approached by Github,
What did
So while we are waiting for the technology to come back, I just want to point out we also have lunch bags back there for everyone who is here with the CHAOSS logo on it and also a CHAOSS sticker in it and a collectible poker chip for today. Only available today. Take those. Yes, please help yourself. They're for everyone.
maintainers as to what they would how maintainers and contributors as to what would be meaningful in their lives and not.
Let me try and turn this. And that thing was going to sleep earlier. So we thought maybe it was asleep, but I can't get it to wake back up if that was the case. Oh, wait. Ah, there we go. It just finally woke up. I unplugged this part.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to present?
What impact of that things do they
I don't have any notes in there, so.
Okay.
All right, we're gonna continue now with Kevin and Elizabeth on why we join and why we leave open source
I don't have any notes.
communities.
Okay.
Bell.
I will do. I will
Don't.
look
All right, just take it away.
Hi. How's everybody? Good? Good. I'm Elizabeth. I'm the CHAOSS Community Manager. If I haven't seen you, please come say hi, because I'm super, super excited to see everybody here. This is really awesome. A lot of you I've seen on Zoom or in the Slack and other places, so I'm really happy to see people in person. Yeah. So this is Kevin. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Kevin Lombard. I'm from the University of Nebraska, Omaha. So I've been with CHAOSS from the beginning, pretty much. So.
Awesome. So today we're going to talk about why we leave and join. You know what? Can I take this off? Is that cool? I can't breathe and talk loudly at the same time. Why we join and leave open source communities. Okay, so several months ago, Kevin and myself and Matt German-Prey, Sean Goggins over here, and a student named Wen Yi embarked on a research journey to learn about how corporations were engaging with open source projects and what levels they were engaging with them. We talked about a lot of things. We talked to 34 people so far, and these have been really in-depth conversations, about an hour long each. We have a list of 20 questions around that we ask them, all kinds of different things about open source. Everything from like why would they engage with open source communities, like what the criteria is, if they have their own open source program office, if they are just contributing back upstream, or if they're just using it, what the structure is, all kinds of things. We also had talked to people from a variety of different backgrounds and roles within the companies, so it wasn't just kind of one. We were trying to get a real good balance of perspectives. We have a very diverse group of participants, all sizes of companies, different industries and things like that too. So it's been a journey, and it's been extremely interesting. I've been in open source for 20 years, and I have joined and left open source communities myself, and so I have my own perceptions and my own experiences, but it was just extremely interesting to hear from other people as well. So after we were gathering this information, as I said, we've done 34. We're not quite finished yet, but we're enough that we can make some general assumptions, and we've seen some themes floating to the top quite a bit. So we're doing a qualitative content analysis. We look at all of the transcripts of all of the recorded interviews, and then we'll go through and we do pair coding to make sure that we're getting a balanced perception of what is being said and interpretation of what's being said. So we do that. We have a couple people who look through those, and then we see what themes come up. We code words into them to make sure that they're, we lump them into buckets essentially. So yeah, that's pretty much what we've been up to. And, oops. So we're only going to focus today on the last couple of questions that we asked. We're not going through the whole 20 because we don't have that much time. But we are going to talk about, these were the questions that we asked these people. Are there certain characteristics of an open source project or community that you look for prior to engagement that may inform decisions about joining? And then also, are there certain characteristics that might make you consider leaving the community? So let's talk about today what was said in those questions. And I will turn it over to Kevin.
Okay, excellent. So the themes that we've started to pull out started to kind of look a little bit like things that could be measured by chaos metrics. And I've just thrown all of the themes up here kind of randomly, and I did that on purpose because I want to illustrate we're not ranking. I can't tell you that any of these themes are more important than others, other than one theme on there, and that's utility. No one is engaging with open source that we talk to for altruistic purposes. It's always about utility, a problem that's being solved for them. But otherwise, the bold themes are themes that we really saw quite often from multiple people, and we saw them in subtly different ways. And I'll kind of go through and talk about some of them. So I've just mentioned utility. So does the project solve a problem for us? That's the first thing we ask when we decide if we're going to use a piece of open source software. But it's also the first thing we ask when we decide if we want to join a community. And that really is what we're talking about here, joining a community and engaging in collaborative design of open source software. All right, so oftentimes we go to the project website, we look for documentation. That's the first step. Documentation can tell us a lot about the project.
Is it on your screen?
I think the computer actually just
died.
shut off.
All right.
Flawless.
Sometimes this is what corporate contribution feels like.
While I'm sitting in the shade.
Oh. Okay. Yeah, we will. Let's. Just gonna grab
Apologies.
mine real quick.
Is it just totally dead?
Yeah.
Did it run out of battery?
Nope. I don't know what's going on. That's going to be a problem. I'm not going to think about it right now.
Stage fright. That's stage fright.
Yeah. Oh, it's coming back, Kevin. Hold on. I don't know if we can get it to work. But anyone have questions? Happy to open the floor right now. Yeah, let's just use yours. I'm so sorry, everyone. Apologies. Do you have a headphone jack?
I do.
It never happens to any of us.
Can I borrow your power?
Yeah, of course.
sorting out the technical difficulties, I did put a lunch thread in the Slack channel. So if you're interested in joining us for lunch, pick a place and we'll collect in the lobby.
Okay. Weird.
There we go.
Okay.
And where's the link to the CHAOSScon Slack? Here?
We have a chaos Slack. I can show you real quick. I'll get there.
Okay, so documentation. One of the first places we look when we're deciding whether or not we want to engage with an open source project is documentation. Documentation can tell us a lot about a project. The documentation that's available can tell us about the professionalism of the project. It can start to give us some ideas about the quality of activity that happens in a project. Additionally, it can tell us a big thing that we're interested in, and that's licensing. So does the licensing work with our business model? Does it work for our organization? And that's a non-starter. So if the licensing is not appropriate, then we can't be there. Other things that we look at organizational control and project governance. Those two things are somewhat similar. Organizational control refers to the corporate leadership within a project. So if a project is being dominated by one corporation, we have to ask ourselves, are our contributions welcome? Can our pull requests, will they get accepted? Will our code be accepted? And then related to that is project governance. Does leadership of the project share those same values? Are they willing to accept our code? So we're interested in how the project is governed and what corporations are going to be involved as well. The usage of the project is a big issue as well. So for us to make an investment in this project and engaging, it does have to be a project that has some usage. Quality of code is important. The security involved, security issues for the project are incredibly important. And then the last two things we see, and we see these two a lot as well, culture. And culture is the professionalism of the company, and also the inclusiveness and the diversity, equity, and inclusion issues that we can see around an organization. And when we join a project, we look for those diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. And then the last thing is sustainability and maintenance, right? So is there active maintenance occurring on this project? If we're going to invest in engaging in this project, we want to make sure that we're not left holding the bag, right? Are we the only ones working on it, or are there other people involved? And interestingly enough, culture, and especially DEI, that one kind of occurred in a couple different places. It was a lot of our interview subjects located that within sustainability, and they also located it within risk, and the risk of the project failing. So the next question we asked was why we leave. And what you'll notice is that a lot of these themes were on the previous slide as well. And we're back to utility again. And so, you know, when we stop needing that project, when we stop needing that piece of software, it makes sense for us to leave, or if we find a better alternative. Although a lot of the subject or the interview participants that we talked to did say that this could be a little tricky. So finding a graceful way to leave a project that we've been engaged in is difficult, and oftentimes there are some politics involved.
I have a question over here from Brian. Brian, did you have a question?
I'm curious the difference between governance and being managed. When you say managed, you're talking about like just the general project process workflow. Is that the differentiation?
So being managed is actually, so what that one is when you're asked to do a lot of work. right? So when you're being managed by the project and you're giving, you come in and they're asking more of you than you would like to give. So it's different than project governance. It's more they're asking you to take more of the load than you're comfortable with.
Thank you.
So once again, we see usage. So that's kind of an obvious one. If no one's using the software, if we're not using the software, then it makes sense to leave the project. Licensing change was one of the top reasons that we saw for leaving a project. So if you join a project with a license and then the project for some reason moves to a different type of license, that is the exit door for many organizations. Sustainability and maintenance. Once again, we don't want to be left holding the bag. If we're in a project and other people aren't working on it, if it becomes a situation where it's just us maintaining the software, we would start to question whether or not we want to be there. Is the project active? Active, once again, that's the number of participants, the response times involved. All of the participants, most of the participants, when asked why would they join and why they leave, an active live community was something that they mentioned. Once again, we see project governance and organizational control. So these are it's the same theme that we saw when for why we join, right? So are our contributions welcome, and can we help move the direction of the project along? And then the last thing we have, once again, is culture. And I will say this: culture was probably the #1 reason that our participants, without ranking anything, almost everyone mentioned culture as a reason to leave a project, and specifically diversity, equity, and inclusion issues around harassment, toxicity, and bullying. So with that, I will turn it back over to Elizabeth, and she'll kind of talk about the big picture for these themes that we've identified.
So it turns out community is pretty important, which was really nice for me. I was like, oh yay, awesome, all right, we appreciate it. And as you can see, it came down to three main themes, and that was project stability, project sustainability, and then of course diversity, equity, and inclusion, as Kevin has mentioned before. So stability, people want to be in stable, active communities, and that's where they decide to engage. Because when you think about it, like people's time is very limited, and so they tend to be a little picky, and so they can spend their time wherever they want. And this is how they're making their choices. So if you're running a community, these are things that you can kind of grab onto and improve if you need to. Or just pay attention to. So stability, of course he mentioned licensing, security is a big deal, and then the quality of code and the user base, that there's a lot of active users. Again, he mentioned activity. Having more contributors is always a good thing. Share the load a little bit. Maintenance and quality of activity, so it's more than just these really quick comments. There's actual meaningful discussions happening. There's meaningful work being done, not just spammy comments or whatever. That doesn't count as activity. And then inactivity is also if there's nothing, if it's just radio silence. People don't want to be in communities like that. But what I really want to focus on is this the diversity, equity, inclusion piece of it, because almost every single person I talked to, as Kevin mentioned, did mention that. And so it really just kind of hits home with how centering DEI in your project can really make a difference when you're trying to build a community, when you're trying to get people engaged and keep them around. The retention is huge. So making a community inclusive, toxicity, people, I even had someone say that if they see toxic behaviors in a community, even if it's the best software in the world, they will not use it in their company. They will not use it. That is their policy. And I really appreciated those comments. I just thought that was really super interesting. So no longer are the days when you can just throw a piece of software out there, a piece of code out there, and you know, expect it to just do great things. You really have to center DEI, even if you want to attract users of your project. Really, that's pretty much it. Does anybody have questions? I don't even know if we have time for questions. But we'll
Yeah,
ask
4
questions.
minutes.
4 minutes? 4 minutes for questions. Who has questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on the effects of like optimized contributor pathways? Like just as an example, one of the communities I'm involved with, there's like dozens, like if you stretch the definition, like potentially thousands of ways to get involved with their project. But I have a hard time articulating like what's the impact if those pathways are inoptimal? You know, do you have any like did you get any sense of like the importance of that?
And like onboarding and like those things, like clear.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't recall that being a theme, but I will say that intuitively, as a community manager, I know that's important. Just know that I recall. Kevin, do you?
It was not a theme associated with these two questions. We did have a few questions about the organizational structure of their corporate OSPOs and some of the methods that they help to or that they use to help people get started with open source or change the culture of their organization to open source. But I don't think anything came up about a distinct path or not that specific, no. Okay. So thank you though, good question.
Mm-hmm. Other questions?
I have a question. Did you get any feedback that would suggest the difference between corporate contributors and non-corporate contributors? I know that in my own life, like I have one profile for stuff I'll do at work and another, which is much more political and altruistic for stuff I'll do all the time.
So I should say the target of these interviews were very specifically corporate contributors. So so that's really the only focus we saw. We didn't see anything for non-corporate contributors or volunteers of that nature. It was all corporate participation. But I do believe there's a difference. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Sorry again.
Do you have the?
I don't have anything on my machine.
Elizabeth failed everyone. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. No worries. Next up, we have Isabella Ferrari, who has talking about characterizing and detecting incivility in open source code review discussions, and it is a recorded talk. So I'm just, yep.
When you start, could you give me a 3, 2, 1, because we gotta sync up too.
Okay, yeah, I can sync that up with you. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. If it would play.
That seems like an odd
It's, yeah, I can open it. I can see. I can just go like this.
That's a good idea.
Oh,
Maybe close it all the way.
yeah. I'll open it again.
these days. No kidding.
Oh, I hear it.
There you go.
Okay. You want to sync up?
Yeah, go ahead.
2, 1, go.
You might have already heard about instability.
Can you turn it up a
So
little
the
bit?
phenomenon of instability
That's
was traditionally
the loudest.
on political and religious debates. And in the 21st century, the civility crisis
I
actually
cannot
focused
turn it up
on
more
how
on the
to
computer.
use
We have to do it in the back, maybe.
How they disagree. Nowadays, with the increasing opportunities for online public debates, instability has received increasing attention in many fields, including the field of software development, and this is what this presentation is about. So my name is Isabella Ferrari. I'm a PhD student at Reactive Montreal in Canada, and together with Jim Shane and Bram Adams, we characterize instability, and we also provide insights on how to detect instability in open source code review discussions. So in the context of software development, instability is characterized by heated discussions that involve personal attacks and unnecessary disrespectful tone. In the context of code reviews particularly, conversations can get heated because reviewers might need to bring negative news to developers, which is presumably more likely to lead to instability. Here we have an example of an uncivil email sent to the Linux kernel mailing list, where someone said, "Your whole email was horribly wrong and the patch that broke things was obviously bad. So fix your compliance tool because it's obviously broken, and also fix your approach to kernel programming." So in this case, the feedback could be provided in a more civil way in order to be more constructive. Also, this person decided to use the disrespectful way to give the feedback and also personally attack the author of the changes. So as a consequence, that might have severe negative impact to the target person as well as to the community as a whole. The thing is that currently there is no knowledge about how instability manifests in code review discussions, as well as the causes and consequences of instability. So currently there is no clear way to effectively address the problem of instability. And to fill this gap, we want to establish more knowledge about instability by characterizing it and also understanding its causes and consequences. Then our ultimate goal would be to help creating healthier working environments for open source communities, in open source communities. So to create healthier environments, we first need to identify the features of discussion found in code review discussions. And based on the features of discussion that convey a disrespectful tone, then we can assess the frequency of instability in code review discussions, as well as the causes and consequences of uncivil communication. And by understanding all of these, we can then provide means to create healthier working environments in open source communities. So to answer those questions, we analyzed 1,545 code review emails from the Linux kernel mailing list, which is the central space for discussions about the Linux kernel development. We focused our analysis on rejected changes for two reasons. First, because rejected changes represent more than 66% of all changes submitted to LKML. And second, because the Linux community often rejects changes with using a harsh language when reporting the rejection, even though the reasons for rejections are purely technical. So first, we collect code review emails from the Linux kernel mailing list in the period of from January 2018 to March 2019. And in this time, more than 400,000 emails were collected. Then we group an email, because an email can have many email replies. So we group individual emails by email threads using the mailbox miner tool, and that resulted in a total of 55,000 email threads. Then we developed an approach to identify rejected chains, and we found that around 48% of the email threads they were rejected. And then we filtered the email threads that contained only one email, that means no patch discussions, or threads that were actually accepted after doing a manual analysis. And after that, we statistically sampled the email threads to do a qualitative analysis, resulting in 262 email threads composed of 1,545 code review emails. And finally, we performed a qualitative coding on the sampled code review emails. And the qualitative coding is an approach in which the researchers will try to identify things from the qualitative data and those themes, they are called codes. So from the extracted themes, we could identify the features of discussion, presenting code review emails of rejected chains, also the cause and consequence of those emails. And we split the analysis of cause and consequences by emails sent by developers and maintainers. After identifying the features of discussion in our qualitative analysis, then we are able to answer our first question, which asks which features of discussion can be found in code review discussions of rejected patches. We group the features of discussion according to the expressed tone. So, concerning the positive tone, we found that humility, considerateness, appreciation, and excitement, those are positive tones, in which humility is the most frequent feature of discussion. Then we identify the neutral features of discussion, and those are sincerely apologies, hope to get feedback, and friendly joke. Then we identify the negative discussion features that are characterized by features that express a negative tone, such as commanding, sadness, and oppression. And finally, we identify the uncivil discussion features, which are features that express disrespectful tone, such as bitter frustration, name-calling, impatience, mocking, threat, vulgarity, and irony. As you can see, bitter frustration, name-calling, and impatience are the most frequent discussion features that represent incivility. So let's take a closer look at them. So bitter frustration appears when someone expresses strong frustration when addressing a false accusation, expressing expectations that are not met, and also voicing dissatisfaction or annoyance due to a lack of information or explanation. For example, when reviewing a piece of code that was submitted by a developer, a maintainer wrote, "If people don't care enough about their code to even check their warnings, I'm not going to waste 1 second pulling the resulting garbage. It's that simple." So, concerning name-calling appears in sentences that include mean or offensive words directed at the person or a group of people. For example, if you want to provide more accurate documentation, then you better come up with something which is helpful instead of a completely useless blurb like the below. And finally, impatience. So participants might demonstrate impatience when they express a feeling that is taking too long to solve a problem, to understand a solution, or to answer a question, or when someone needs to repeat the same information over and over again. So after reviewing a patch, a maintainer wrote, "I've looked at your patch for way too long now and still don't see how you've shown it to be corrected." Okay, so now that we know what are the features of discussion that express incivility in code review discussions of rejected patches, then we can characterize how much incivility exists in code review discussions. So we classify the emails into technical, civil, and uncivil based on the discussion's features that they demonstrate. An email is technical if it contains only straightforward technical discussions and do not contain any feature of discussion. And technical emails, they represent 89% of the analyzed emails. Then, uncivil emails are those that express at least one uncivil feature of discussion, and 7% of the code review emails, they are uncivil. And then we have the civil emails, which are those that express positive, neutral, or negative features of discussion, and none of those features, they are uncivil. So 4% of the analyzed emails, they are civil. And as expected, because of the technical field of LPML, most of the code review discussions of rejected patches, they are purely technical. However, if we look into the non-technical details, that is by summing up the uncivil and civil emails from the previous slides, around 11% of the analyzed emails, we observed that 67% of the non-technical emails that are actually uncivil, and this is quite a lot and was a surprising result to us. So now that we know what are the uncivil emails and their frequency, then we can assess the cause and consequence of those emails. To do this, we split the analysis by analyzing the uncivil emails sent by either developers and maintainers. We have identified the many causes and consequences of uncivil communication in developers and maintainers' emails, And I'll be presenting here the most frequent cause of incivility and the most frequent corresponding consequences to those causes. So concerning uncivil emails sent by developers, the most frequent cause was first the maintainer's feedback. And the most frequent consequences are that the maintainer escalated the uncivil conversation. That means the conversation got heated. The maintainer discontinued further conversation, so the maintainer just stopped talking. And the maintainer kept discussing things in a civil way. The second most frequent cause was the violation of community conventions. So community conventions are related to the workflow imposed by the community by not understanding why they need to do a tag use workflow, or out of a surprise, a workflow that the developer was not informed of. And when that happened, the maintainer most frequently discontinued the conversation. Also, developers' uncivil comments were sometimes triggered by being misinterpreted by the maintainer or being unable to follow the maintainer's instructions. And when that happened, the maintainer most frequently escalated the uncivil conversation. In some times, developers were uncivil due to the maintainer's uncivil behavior. And when that happened, the maintainer often reinforced their standpoint or escalated the uncivil conversation. And finally, developers were also uncivil due to inappropriate solution proposed by the maintainer. And when that happened, the maintainer often provided a technical explanation or escalated the uncivil conversation. Now, considering uncivil emails sent by maintainers, we found that maintainers were uncivil due to inappropriate solution proposed by the developer. And when that happened, the developer often accepted the maintainer's criticism, discontinued further conversation, or discussed the problem in a civil way. Maintainers were also uncivil when the source code submitted by the developers had a poor code quality, and the most frequent consequence were developers discussing the problem in a civil way or accepting the maintainer's criticism. Maintainers were also uncivil because developers were violating the community conventions, and when that happened, developers often discontinued further conversation or accepted the maintainer's criticism. Also, maintainers' uncivil comments were sometimes triggered by being misinterpreted by developers. And the most frequent consequences were the acceptance of the maintainer's criticism and also escalating the uncivil conversation. So now we know the cause and consequence of uncivil communication, so we can provide means to create healthier working environments for open source communities. We suggest two approaches for that. First is, we call it proactive approaches, which are approaches that are done to address the causes of incivility before it happens. And then we have the reactive approaches, which are approaches that can be done to address incivility after it happens. So for the proactive approach, we will provide suggestions on how to address the cause of incivility. And in this presentation, I will provide suggestions to only some of the causes. So when the cause of incivility is violation of community conventions, open source communities can include a training for newcomers and developers to ensure that everyone is aware about the community conventions. Also, maintainers should always include why the patch was rejected to give a feedback to the developer. And also, open source communities could gamify the review process so that developers that follow the community conventions, they gain a reputation and status. When the cause of incivility was communication issues, so open source communities could develop a code of conduct focused on the code review process. That means that communities could establish some guidelines on how maintainers should communicate constructive feedback, and also how developers could interpret the feedback. So when the cause of incivility was the maintainer's feedback, open source communities could include a training for maintainers on how to give constructive feedback, and also a training for developers on how to handle rejections, emphasizing that rejection is not a failure. Also, open source communities, they could make available coaching or mentoring sessions for maintainers. When the cause of incivility was inappropriate solution, then developers should always include a technical explanation of their solution, including the downsides of the solution, the motivation of the proposed patch, as well as the limitations. When the cause of instability was poor code quality, then open source communities could include a training for newcomers and developers to ensure that everyone is aware about the community's expectations in terms of code quality. Also, open source communities could adopt existing code analysis tools and integrate them into the developer's workflow. So, in addition to addressing the causes, tools could be used by open source contributors to check if their emails are uncivil before they are sent to the mailing list. And a more fine-grained tool could also let contributors know what type of instability is present in their text by mentioning the discussion features that we have identified here in our study. So concerning the reactive suggestions, that is when instability happens already, then community leaders, they need to do damage control, and community members need to be informed and properly respond to instability. So for that, open source communities could use bots that are constantly checking if the emails sent to the mailing list are uncivil or civil. And if uncivil discussions are found, then the community leaders are warned and to take the appropriate measures. So we have provided some suggestions on how to prevent or mitigate instability, but what about automatically detecting instability? So our first approach was to see if instability could be detected through sentiment analysis tools. And for that, we tested 3 software engineering specific sentiment analysis tools called Sent4SD, SentStrength SE, and SentCR. We found that sentiment analysis tools, they tend to have high precision, low recall, and the overall performance tend to be very low. So for example, we found that tools detect negative sentiment with a precision of 73%, but they miss up to 91% of the cases. So we observed that instability actually cannot be reliably captured by just analyzing the sentiment of a text. And this is because instability has many dimensions not captured by those tools, such as the context of the conversation. In our case, is the previous emails in the email thread, also the familiarity among people, and the granularity of analysis, if it's in the thread, in the email, or in the sentence level of analysis. Also, some features of discussion, they might be hard to be detected by those tools, such as irony, mocking, and threat. So concerning building instability-specific detectors, we suggest that researchers or open source communities could develop heuristics to identify the discussions features found in our study. Also, to accurately detect instability, these heuristics, they need to consider the context of the conversation, the familiarity among people, and the granularity of analysis. Also, in order to improve the performance of classifiers, an instability-specific lexicon for each discussion feature could be built. And that could be done based on our data set that is publicly available and could be extended to train machine learning models to detect instability. So thank you so much for your attention. And to recap, we found that bitter frustration, name calling, and impatience are the most frequent uncivil features of discussion. We also found that surprisingly 2/3 of the non-technical discussions are uncivil. We also identified many causes and consequences of uncivil emails sent by developers and maintainers. And we suggest many proactive approaches and reactive approaches and also how to build instability specific detectors. So I invite you to read our paper for more details, and there are a lot of more interesting content and concrete suggestions made in the paper that I could not cover here in this presentation. And finally, we are conducting interviews with Foss contributors to understand their opinions and their experiences related to uncivil communication. And please consider participating in our interview by filling out this short survey. And here on the left side is my contact information. Please contact me if you have any questions or any points that require further discussion. And thank you so much for your attention.
So thank you, Isabella. Next up, we have Stephen and Emmy from Open at RIT about Mystic. So we'll switch over. After this talk, we will go over where the sponsor showcase was, there's the Seattle sign, and we're going to take a group picture in front of that gigantic sign. So you're all invited, everyone who is here in person, we want you on the picture to show that you're part of this event today. And yeah. Sorry.
If you get a question, just please repeat it back because for the people on the live stream.
All right. Thank you.
Perfect. And I know we are running a little behind schedule, but we still want to give you the time that each speaker has, so we'll probably cut the break a little shorter.
Cool. Fantastic.
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Ladies, gentlemen, and those of us who know better, welcome to Open at RIT's talk on Mystic, an initial effort in academic metrics, impact, and community. My name is Emmy Simpson. I use any pronouns except for she, her, and I am the full stack developer at Open at RIT. And I will leave it with my co-presenter to introduce himself and a little bit more about us.
Hi, I'm Steve Jacobs. I've been teaching open source at RIT for 12, 13 years, give or take, and within the last year was generously provided the opportunity by my university to open an academic Ospo. We took a hint from Said and Hopkins and decided to spin open our own. And one of the things that is a challenge, I suppose I have to, am I up, down, or return? Spacebar, all right. Okay, so why an open programs office? Open work happens everywhere in a university. Open software, open hardware, open research, open science, open data, open OERs, open other things I've forgotten. We tend to bubble those as open work, and that's why we're an open programs office at RIT versus an open source programs office, because we wanted to signal to the entire academic community, artists, humanitarian folks, etc., that all are welcome and we want to support all that kind of stuff, not just software. What kind of research? We have been privileged to be supported by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation to take a construct that we created years ago called LibreCorps, which connects my student workers in software engineering or open source community with NGOs and external organizations that need support to moving a team inward to focus for faculty research, support faculty research. When we put out our first call for presentations, we got 26 proposals sent to us, about 23 of which we are able to serve because some of them were kind of out of scope of what we do. And they range from computational astrophysics to accessibility for open access journals to vineyard genomics to my favorite name out of all the proposals, the Victorian Autobiographical Information Network, or VAIN, which really just made me happy to be able to fund anything called VAIN. And we provide student teams to help these folks promote their research out to an open community. In general, we are not building stuff for them. We are helping them move stuff out in the open because they don't know how to. We're helping them reboot an open source community by providing better comms, better web access, those types of things. So unlike most support teams in open source where you find primarily engineers, Emmy is my current engineer, go Emmy. But everybody else is UI, UX, project management, writer, designer, industrial. We have an industrial designer working on our playbook. So we're almost a digital services bureau to support open research. That's what we're doing. What makes an academic OSPO different? We've got 3 different constituencies. We have in industry, you have your employees, and you work with your employees, their staff, their roles are well defined. And generally they're supposed to do what you tell them, ha ha ha. We have students, and students are in fact a different class Now that feels like it should be obvious on its face, but it's not, in that at most universities, they're essentially staff in that anything they do is owned by the university, right? Whether it's homework or anything else, the IP belongs to the university. At RIT, unless the students are doing work paid for off of a grant or as part of a work study program or any of those obvious things, they own their own IP. And so they're a second kind of constituency that our Open Programs Office has to address. And the third are faculty, which are kind of employees, but because of the scientific method, their work is kind of sort of supposed to be open, unless they want to commercialize it or the university wants to commercialize it. It's gray, and speaking as a faculty member, I can say that you can't tell us to do anything anyway, so whatever you try to set up may or may not take hold. So various different folks, and in an ideal world, however, most of these folks are aiming at research and scholarship and open work first. How do we coordinate this? How do we even find out who's doing what on campus? Well, Hopkins, myself, other folks, we're trying to figure that out. And one way that we're trying to figure that out is through the stuff you folks do, right? One way we're hoping to collect data on what faculty are doing in terms of things being open is to give them the tools they need to defend their open work, right? Faculty generally get involved, get evaluated, offered tenure, offered promotion, based on things like numbers of published journal articles and how many people have included that research, written that research, whatsoever. It's a very slow process. It's a very long tail. Academia doesn't really want to move more toward doing something that's more agile, though there are forces in the world like the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine that are trying to put more emphasis on presidents and provosts at universities to change that culture, make things more flexible. It's ironic in that universities and pretty much anything no longer can exist without the World Wide Web standard, and the World Wide Web standard was created initially to make scientific work more communicable, to be able to disseminate it more easily. So even though we're all using it, academia doesn't want to use open work metrics and open work analysis to validate the open work that their people are doing. Am I making sense? Excellent. So, come on. Oh, I did all that. So why Mystic? Essentially, when I started talking about this stuff about a year ago, Georg and Matt were kind enough to invite me to join the Chaos Value Group to start talking about what would an academic need that isn't in what Grimoire already looks at, what the group already looks at. So we've been talking about that. And as kind of an incentivizer, we're hoping that as RIT builds this system that allows faculty to demonstrate the impact of their open work in non-traditional ways, they see value, and we eventually figure out what RIT's footprint is in terms of open work on the larger community. And who's doing good work, who needs help, what kind of help can we give them. All those motivations are why we're looking at Mystic.
All right, so let's delve a little bit deeper into the question of why Mystic. And I think to do that, an important thing to look at is what is the state of open source at our university, and no doubt at a whole bunch of universities, as it is right now. Well, the current state is that we have absolutely no metrics. We have no idea what the current state of open source at the university is. Like, you know, we've got open source going on, but we have no way of measuring how much or what it looks like. You know, there could be 10 groups working on open source at the university. There could be 20. There could be 100. There could be every person in the university is currently doing open work, but we don't know about it because problem number 2, open source projects rarely communicate with each other. So even when open source projects are happening, they don't know about the other projects and they don't necessarily talk with the other projects. And so it's very possible that 2 open source projects are doing things in very adjacent fields And they just don't talk to each other when they could be collaborating and building and sharing. Number 3, we don't have the ability to provide resources to these groups, because it's very hard to provide resources to a group that you don't know exists. And it's very hard to provide resources to a group that doesn't know that you exist. That's not an easy task, and it's not one that, frankly, we can really do it all. So into Grimoire Lab, I'm assuming that everybody here didn't stumble into CHAOSScon without knowing very much about Grimoire Lab. But just in case, because I want to talk about it, I'm going to pretend that you don't. And in fact, I'm not just going to pretend that you don't. I'm going to pretend that you are perhaps a liberal arts professor who doesn't know what Grimoire Lab is. And you have just stumbled in to Open at RIT, and we're gonna help you get set up with Grimoire Lab to help you grow your community. So thankfully, it's a very simple process. This right here is the bestiary interface, which allows you to have open ecosystems, and you just add open projects to that. And you can add several data sources of a type. Don't forget to add your GitHub API key. And after that, you'll get all of these very fancy graphs on Kibiter here. And wait, hold on. I just got to add you into the more grid configuration file right here. Just take a second. All right. And now you'll be over here on that. And okay, I understand you're confused. Don't worry. We have a very good graph for this right here. So yeah, it's, as someone who has been working in this area for several months, I've learned a little bit more about this graph, but I still only know sort of superficial stuff. And I am a CS student who has spent months working with Grimoire Lab components and talking with you folks and learning what all of this does, but I still don't think I could explain to you this graph in its entirety. And if you are a liberal arts professor who is not majoring in computer science or data science, but perhaps in some form of literature analysis, the difference between raw and enriched data and what Sybil and Kidash and Kibiter and all of these components are might be a little bit hard to grip in one meeting with your academic Ospo. So let's go over a few of the things that might be might make Grimoire Lab a little bit difficult to use in its current state. So number 1, it's difficult to understand. We just went over that. It's a very big graph. And huge kudos to everybody who helped develop the components on that graph, because it accomplishes a very important task, and all of those components working in synchronicity is a very impressive feat, and it accomplishes some very fancy data science. But it's a little bit hard to get into as someone who is not familiar with the project. Number 2, there's not that much access controls. Grimoire Lab works great if there is one organization sort of at the helm steering the ship. But the moment you open it up to a wider community, whether that be all of the Open at RIT fellows, or all of the students at RIT, or all of the faculty at RIT, now one person's mistake might corrupt a config file that makes the service offline for everybody, or God forbid you have a malicious actor who deliberately wants to do something to mess with the system. There's not too many access controls on the existing Grimoire Lab suite of projects. And number 3, you have some very disparate components. In that last slide, we had a screenshot of Kibiter, which is the fork of Kibana that has lots of very fancy graphs. There was also Bestiary. But those are 2 completely different websites with very different styles, very different ways of interacting with them. And you might register an account on Bestiary and not have an account on Kibiter. And they talk in a lot of ways, but in other ways they are very disparate. And so enter Mystic. Mystic is our attempt to sort of fix some of these problems, to glue together some of these components, or at the very least hide the seams. We want to make it easy to use. We want to make it so that there are, any liberal art professor can come in and understand it right off the bat, or at least very easily. And we want to add access control so that we can open this up to an even wider community. So rather than kind of describing Mystic to you, I'd like to be able to take a minute to show you it. So here's what you get when you first create a Mystic account. You get one very big button that allows you to add a project. And let's just pretend I slapped that button. Boom. This is what it looks like to add a project to Mystic. So you have about 4 text fields. It all fits on one screen. just a project name, description. You can add data sources with just a drop-down box and text field. And you can also add multiple authors. So let's just fill in some information there. Just pretend that that was a perfectly seamless transition. Wow, Emmy, your transition was so seamless, I couldn't tell that you just switched from a static image to a video. But all right, let's fill in a description. We can jump down and add data sources. No need to memorize what data sources, it's all right there. And you can type in things just like that. We're going to add a URL for Mystic, as well as one more URL for a separate piece of software called Mystic Coordinator that I won't be talking about too much unless people want to talk about it in the Q&A. But just like that, we've already set up a project. I don't do it in this demo to keep things simple, but if we had more than one person working on this project, we could very easily just add another person in there, and they would also be able to manage the project, and they would be listed as a co-maintainer. So once we hit save, another seamless transition, and we have a nice little card for Mystic right there. But Mystic does more than create pretty cards, so if we click on that card, we'll get a whole page automatically generated from just that information that we put in there. So we've already got maintainers, we have a brief description, and all of the links that we're using to collect data about these projects are also listed there, because those links don't happen to just be a place where you can find data, it also happens to be a place where you can find information about the project. And so we include that on the page as well as some graphs, and let's zoom in on that. I've actually pulled a bit of a switcheroo there. These are not the Mystic graphs, but graphs for an unrelated project because I wanted to show off the issue durations graph, and there aren't enough issues in Mystic to be able to do that quite yet. But these are just 3 of the graphs that are currently programmed in, which are dynamically shown based on what sort of links you've added into the project. So because we've added 2 GitLab links, we get 3 graphs for that right now. A contributors graph, which measures not just the contributors who have code commits in the repository, but any kind of contribution whatsoever. So that can be opening an issue, responding to an issue. We also have many other types of data sources in there, like the Open Science Foundation, as well as things like Mattermost. So if you add a contribution to an Open Science Foundation project, or if you're talking a lot in the Mattermost contribution, or in the Mattermost channel, you will also get displayed on the contributors. We have a general activity graph, so you can see that for this repository, there was a tiny little tick back in 2017. The repository lay dormant for a while, but then back in 2019 there was a big, huge spike, and it's gone a little bit up and down since then, but it's more or less stable. We can see that as far as issues go, almost half of the issues are closed in less than a day. The rest are closed in less than a week, but there are a few that remain open for a year or a little bit longer. So you could use that information in ways that I'm sure you're all familiar with, figuring out what kinds of issues stay in what kinds of spots, and optimizing it so that your community becomes more friendly and more welcoming. So I'm going to zoom out again for a second. And up in the top left corner, I'm just going to click that Explore button, pretend I'm doing this with my cursor, but I'm not. So this is another core page that's part of Mystic. And so here is a display of all of the projects in Mystic, because that page is very nice, the one that I just showed you. But I already know what Mystic is. I typed that information in. I don't need to be told what the description of Mystic is or where its links are. That's all information that is very nice, but also deserves to be shared, and can be shared, and should be shared to help you grow your community and to help other people learn about your community as well. So to that end, we've added the Explore page, which is a list of all of the projects that are currently registered in Mystic. This is just sort of a small section of the projects that we've added as a way to test things. But these are some of the projects that Open at RIT has worked with fellows on in the past, as well as that one down there that we just added now. So you can see that you've got lots of information about them kind of at a glance, and you can get that card. And if you were to click on any of those cards, you would be brought right back to that page that we just showed, where you can learn a little bit more about the project, how to get involved, and where that project is. All right, so pop quiz, what is Mystic? I just told you, so hopefully you were paying attention and you remembered. But number one, Mystic is a tool. It's a tool to measure your community. It's a tool to use that information and grow your community. It's a tool that can be used by students, faculty, professors, anyone who's kind of in a position of community management, who wants to make their community bigger and stronger and healthier. Mystic is also a gauge, and it's a gauge for not just the people sort of running their own communities, but a gauge for Ospos as a whole, or any kind of wider community. We can use this as a way of figuring out where RIT, or whatever university or Ospo or company is using Mystic, and figure out where that organization is in open source. Get a measure on what kind of projects are out there, what kind of projects are active, what kind of activity. Because don't forget, all of this is still built on top of Grimoire Lab, which means that if you want, you can easily open up a Kibiter dashboard and render whatever sort of dashboards and graphs your data science loving heart may want to see. But I think most importantly, Mystic is a platform for a community. Open source, more so than anything, is about community. You know, you can lock Linux Torvalds in a room for 30 years, but you definitely won't get Linux, let alone any of the thriving software that makes Linux Linux. Open source is fundamentally about community, about the ways that we collaborate and share and work together to build all of this software and all of these wonderful ecosystems. And I think that Mystic holds a very important role in making that community happen, because you can't have community without knowing where the other projects are and knowing what sort of space you're existing in. You can't have community without talking to other projects. And I think Mystic holds a place to be the glue that brings a lot of projects together and a lot of people together to develop these projects. And to that end, I think it holds a very important place, not just in Ospos, but also in open source as a whole. All right. So
and just to bring it back to the initial interest in doing this, is it's also to be able to show, as a faculty member, every year to get evaluated, I have to reprint and edit and add to my 30-page vita that lists every burp I ever did during my academic career, which they won't read, but they make me put out there, that doesn't allow for the kind of work that I might be doing. We get evaluated often by people who are not members of our core discipline. I'm a game professor in a college of computing. Most of the people who look at my work, evaluate me for tenure, evaluate me for promotion, don't understand what I do. To the point where 10 years ago-ish, we wrote a 10-page document to accompany every candidate from my department that goes up to explain, no, you're not going to see journal articles from us for the most part. We do different things. This is what impact looks like in our field. This is what translation looks like in our field. This is how we know what people are doing in our field, right? Getting those graphs out, getting those cards that will explain what the project is and why these numbers are important goes a long way to helping fix those gaps. And with that, I throw it open to mostly questions for Emmy because they are smarter than I am. So.
Please remember to restate the question for the folks on the live stream.
Thank you. Yes.
Matthew Miller from Fedora. We have a bunch of weird data sources because a lot of our stuff predates like GitHub and GitLab being things, like a message bus, our own GitForge. How hard is it to get that kind of data into this?
All right, so the question was, how hard is it to take weird data sources that aren't necessarily easy to process, GitLab and GitHub repositories, and put that into Mystic and stuff like that? To answer that, Mystic is built on top of Grimoire Lab. So if Grimoire Lab can kind of understand your source, then that is something that Mystic can handle too. The one exception being graphs. Graphs are sort of manually put in there. But if you can come up with an Elasticsearch query to be able to process that data into a graph, then it can absolutely be processed by Mystic. And in fact, if you have your data sources as a Git repo, that's something that can already be processed right out of the bat. Mystic has support for any kind of Git repository. But in addition to that, if you have like a Bugzilla or something like that, as long as it's something that can ultimately be fed into Grimoire Lab, then that is something that can be fed into Mystic.
Just to follow up on Emmy very quickly before we go to Sean, One of the things we pull data in from right now is the Center for Open Science's Open Science Platform, OSF. So that's capturing more data than GitHub and GitLab, different data. It's looking at preprints, it's looking at a bunch of other things. Being able to build this out so it doesn't just talk about software is something that's key for us, and I think that's one of the reasons Georg and Matt invited me to start coming to meetings, to try to figure out how do we do stuff that isn't grabbing the repository stats.
And Sean, you had a question?
Yeah, it looks like the backend is talking to MySQL. So are you taking your MoreLab data and putting it in MySQL to display?
So the GrammarLab data is actually still in Elasticsearch. We use a MySQL database for tracking users and tracking some of the structural projects. But the actual core data, like the stuff that comes out in graphs and all of the raw and enriched data gathered by GrammarLab, is still in a Elasticsearch database. Yep.
I was wondering what efforts you're working on to create distinctions between disciplines of projects. Like it seems at OpenRIT, they'll have many different disciplines academically and otherwise that are being represented through this open work. And I was wondering if you have metrics that are trying to display that in some ways.
So the question was, how do we sort of display and represent the differences in what kinds of data and what kind of fields are displayed? To answer that, we definitely have a number of sources that are like, SJ had mentioned, the Open Science Foundation is data that is collected. But we don't have a specific discrimination between this is a science project and this is a code project, other than this has a bunch of GitHub links and this has a bunch of OSF links. Because I don't know if that's a particularly clear distinction to make. There's a lot of like Open Science Foundation projects that are also a lot about code. And you can have a code project that refers to a scientific document or anything else that you can think of. There's always going to be interlinks. So we do, back in this one, we have like a little indicator to kind of give you at a glance what kind of data sources are linked in this. So you can see that Monolith here has a GitHub repo, whereas, I don't know, TestSmelt has a static link to a website as well as a generic Git repo. But we don't explicitly make a distinction between different fields.
And this is so alpha. This is really just the first step out of the gate, just proof of concept, and so much input desired for people on how we can do better with this.
Go ahead.
For the portion of the project that is for gauging, how are you choosing which projects to compare?
So the question was, for the portion of the project that is for gauging, how are we choosing which projects to compare? That might actually be a little bit more of an SJ question, but the main way that we're doing that right now is, although it might be in the future, predominantly through dashboards like Kibiter, which allow you to do analysis of the Elasticsearch data. And so you can do any kind of comparison that you would otherwise do using Kibiter and GrammarLab, but I don't know if SJ has anything you would like to add.
So that alpha part, right now we're working with, so as I said, we have this pool of what will eventually be 30 projects we support over 2 years. We're starting with those just to try to use them as a sample to figure out what we need to do and how we can build things out. We probably won't roll this out to the faculty at large for, probably starting in calendar year 2022. Just so we're working with people who are getting support from us. They're more likely to be patient with us because we're helping them out. So once we don't want to have to do an analysis like we do on the Linux kernel on the rage, hate emails. We want to start small and then grow.
Just as a follow-up, So that pretty much means, like, say you're looking at project A, and you are the one that chooses to compare it to project B. The Mystic doesn't choose that project to compare it to for you.
Yeah, so the question was, as a follow-up, given project A and project B, your Mystic is not the thing choosing to compare those two projects. It's something that is done manually. And yes, Mystic does not, at least at the moment, have any sort of facilities to automatically compare those things.
Yeah, the whole space of academic analytics is very mushy, very mushy. There's been this debate off and on about alt metrics, right? You know, well, I get lots of people coming to my blog, right? Well, but are they peer-reviewed people? Are they really using your stuff? Are you gaming it and having all your friends put stars on this? You know, there's this back and forth about how do you move away from what used to be the gold standard, hopefully, of journal articles, because we do even that badly, right? At this point, those who are professors or graduate students here, you know, you set up your Google Scholar account and it searches the web and it finds out how many people have mentioned your thing, and that gives you, what is it, an H value, an H factor? I can't even, an H index, right? So already they're reducing your entire scholarly career to a 2-digit number. It's far from ideal, and it's a big, we're hoping to put some concrete examples into that debate to try to get things expanded out. But it's going to be a long process. And the only reason that it's probably going to pick up the speed is, as I said, the national academies are now making a big push to have people open. If you're not in academia or research, there used to be this old commercial for a brokerage firm, I won't say which one, where you'd be in a restaurant and people are talking and there's all this buzz, or a cocktail party, and then somebody says, well, my broker is blah, blah. And the room goes silent and everybody's looking at, you know. So that's kind of like what the national academies are. The national academies are saying it's time to get very serious about open science, open data, open research, open scholarship. There's a meeting to get a cohort of colleges and universities trying to push this October 11th. So we're going to see a lot more effort into working in this space. I don't know if that helps, but there you go.
All right, we are at time. Thank you very much. We are now, sorry, yes, Matt?
Well, I was just going to say, we have T-shirts over here. If you'd like a T-shirt, or in the bags, come see me for a T-shirt. I can't promise you I have the size you want, but we give it a shot if you want a T-shirt. So come see me.
All right, so we are now going to around the corner, there's a big sign with Seattle where we would like to take a picture with all of you. So you're all invited. And then at 11:25, we are back here with lightning talks. We have 3 lightning talks, and I'm happy to tell you what they are so that you know what to expect. First, we'll have Don Foster talking about measuring project health at VMware. Then Lucas Gonze talking about on privacy. And then Kelea Champion on moving from metrics to insights, identifying at-risk digital infrastructure. So at 11:25, please be back here. And now we're all going to take a picture. And if you're leaving us at any point, please take lunch bags and chaos bags. All right. Please join us for the picture. Everyone, please join us for the picture.
Remember, T-shirts, come see me if you want one. Really, it's no big deal.
Yeah. Sean says he wanted to present. I don't, there isn't, yeah, no, there isn't. Sean. Are the two talks that were supposed to be before the lightning talks, or are those still happening? Yeah. Okay, so it's not gonna be the. I was just wondering if the two talks that were supposed to be before the lightning talk are still gonna be happening. Oh, okay, I just misunderstood the like the key stage scheduling. I don't know. Okay.
They look like they're running big. Yeah.
Well, there you go. You can decide.
Right on.
Make sure you get a lunch bag too. Probably do that on my way out.
Right on. I think that I needed many
Yeah.
Okay, let's go get our picture taken.
Whoa!
Look at it's Miko. Hey, how's it going?
Do y'all have any larges or extra larges?
Yeah, well I've got both.
All right. I'll take a large.
Is someone staying in this room?
Got more of those than
We'll be right back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
No.
My
All
life
right.
is on that laptop, so.
Is somebody staying here?
We'll be right back.
Okay.
In a minute. We'll just take a quick picture saying, yeah.
Yeah, quick if it's choosing.
Just around the corner where the big sign is. All right, Sean, we want you in the picture.
Yeah, well, I think I'm the camera.
All right. We also have a staff person.
Oh, there is?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, because, yeah, Elizabeth thought there was nobody to do that.
I found someone already.
Okay.
So thank you. Yeah, Rob, thanks for being here. Absolutely.
So GitHub used to return the user ID and information for any email address associated with your account.
Yeah.
But now it only returns it sometime in the last several months for your primary email address.
Okay.
So this is a problem I'm aware of, but I didn't realize it was affecting your stuff until.
Can I just unplug the Eric's computer?
Yeah, totally. I'm sure. And anyway, I'm fixing it.
Okay. But it's something that we can. How long will it take to fix? Just out of curiosity.
I don't have a fast answer to that
Okay.
question, but I took all the contributors that were unique, and so.
Remember t-shirts, if you want
I
a
will
t-shirt,
be-
I'm your guy.
I'm hoping not long.
You're really soft.
I'm your guy, I'm your guy. Before they, just say the word.
But I'm also going to work on an alternative. I'm working on it.
Okay, cool.
I'm sorry.
No worries. I mean, it's one of those things that it's just been really hard to diagnose. Like we don't.
Yeah.
It's
No,
because it's some of the contributors, not all of the contributors, and it's just been kind of hard to nail down.
No, I think it's. I mean, I do think there's improvement now, but there's still like that one guy who has like he's got 2 email addresses, but he also has 2 names.
It's not uncommon, actually.
Yeah, I should check, but he's only got 1 GitHub ID.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I just need to figure out which one is the primary one, and maybe we need to do a little more testing. But I'll get it.
Feel free to guess. I don't actually care which is the primary.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's
like
just,
from my standpoint, I pick one of the 2 names. Like, I don't really care.
yeah. Okay. All right.
I mean, it's their own fault that they have weird names on some of their.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right.
As long as I have something unique, I don't really care which one.
Can you just leave it on my chair? Of course.
Is all the fun without any you know, like, and then we're
Well, there was another group of literally like go, you know, get together over beers and do village outdoors. That would be great. There's like another fun stuff.
I thought that was done.
Stuff on another group of stuff.
I thought we
Right now?
I mean, my background is it wasn't clear what case.
Oh, I thought you talked about the lightning talk.
Are we doing lightning talk? Shoya,
We have Shoya King. They have and Sean has and then
I thought you said lightning talk was the
I just don't want to be short. I think you did say that. I agree. I agree.
And I promise
I was born in Westfield. I agree. At some point in my youth, my family moved up to the Rio Grande. I went to
that's good.
There's clarity coming in.
Sorry, I put my computer out because I thought you said lightning talk, so I'm guessing lightning talk will start
Lightning talks aren't supposed to be happening. I changed the schedule.
You know, you're in a year.
Yeah, if you reload the website, it's going to change it, but our website is not so all the changes from here. I changed it this morning and it got overwritten with the 4th push and whatnot. Yeah, so.
All right. Well, just let me know when I should
Is this
start.
yours or is this mine?
We unplugged yours. I hope you don't mind.
Okay. All right. Okay. Let's give it another minute. I know some are still getting coffee.
Okay. I'll talk fast.
We have time.
Okay, good.
I should have said 11:30. I was over optimistic.
You just gotta be the taskmaster.
Yeah. I'll make the announcement that we're starting.
I said no.
I didn't do it either. So I'm my primary is but I
Yeah.
All right, so I know there's a little confusion about the schedule. It is changed in our Git repository, but the website doesn't update as quickly as I would like it to. So we are doing lightning talks now and then continuing with the other 3 talks that we still have. We should still end on time if we don't have more technical difficulties. So I think we are on track for today. Next up is Dawn. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Oh, I can take my mask off to talk, right? Whew. So at VMware, we have well over 1,000 open source project repositories spread out across a few dozen GitHub orgs. So having a scalable approach to measuring project health was super important for me. We also have hundreds of contributors, maintainers, product managers, engineering managers, and others who do actually care about the health of specific open source projects within VMware. So the dashboards had to be simple enough that absolutely anyone within VMware could easily use them to make decisions about where a project's doing well and what could be improved. And we had to do that without any training required. So simplicity was key. Now, community managers and metrics aficionados, like those of us here in this room and at CHAOSScon, we love to dig into these detailed dashboards, right, to understand every nuance. But I know from experience that when most ordinary average contributors are presented with a dashboard like the ones from the Augur front end, Grimoire Lab, DevStats, they get super overwhelmed and they just don't know what to focus on, and then they abandon the whole thing. So my solution to this was to write a few Python scripts that use the Augur database to generate 4 custom charts with only the things that were most important for us. And for each of these charts, I admittedly created slightly arbitrary thresholds that seemed to work pretty well for most of our projects, at least the active ones. And I used those to quickly indicate whether a project seemed healthy or at risk. And I really do encourage our projects to interpret the metrics on their own to take into account the particular needs of the project, because every project's a little bit different and you do have to interpret the metrics. So for all of the charts, I added enough data to the title at the top to help people understand whether the project looks healthy or at risk on each of the 4 metrics. And at the bottom of the chart, I added more description to give people a little bit more help in interpreting it. So starting with contributor risk, I try to make sure that 1 or 2 people aren't making all of the contributions, so that if a single person left the project, that it could continue with minimal disruptions. So this one looks really good. You've got loads of contributions with no one person dominating the project. This one, on the other hand, we do have a couple like this. Doesn't look so great. I've removed the names. I don't want to embarrass anybody, but this is what it looks like when I'm not happy. It's also important. It's also important that we reply to pull requests in a timely manner, right? So our internal guideline for projects is that every PR should receive a response from an actual human being within 2 business days. So the top line's the total number of PRs, that's the black line, and the green line below it shows the number of PRs that were responded to within 2 business days. And what I look for here is that the lines should be as close together as possible without any huge gaps. So you can see this one in particular looks really good. Now, while quick responses are important, it's also important that we keep up with PRs and resolve them in a timely manner. This slide shows the same black line for the total pull requests, and then the green line shows closed PRs. So that's either merged or closed without merge. And you can see in this case that there is a pretty big gap there for several months. And The reality is though, right, we all get behind on PRs at some point, and it might not be a big deal if someone gets behind for a while. And maybe some of the team working on this project had other priorities. Maybe there was a good reason for this. But here you can see why I added a line about the trend to both of these graphs. Because in this case, they were behind for a while, but they've been doing much better. And I don't want teams stressing out about the fact that they're showing up as red in the title when they're already working to improve it and we're already showing improvement. So I think looking at the trend is also important. And finally, I look at the number of recent releases. And these include all releases, not just the big ones, but even just like the tiny point releases. And it's critical, right, that security updates and bug fixes land in a release in some sort of timely fashion. And it's important to get those new features out too. So I look for projects to release something about every month-ish. So I'll leave you with just one final thought. So while looking at project health, it's important to remember that every project is a little different. So it's important to interpret the metrics in light of the project's needs. Because every project is different, metrics should never ever be used to punish people or teams, but instead they should be used to help teams focus on where they can make improvements and become as healthy as possible. With that, thank you, and that is my last slide. Do we have time for questions, or?
No, sorry,
Okay,
we don't
no.
have time for questions.
I'll be here
Feel
all
free-
day.
I'll put it in Slack.
I'll put it in Slack.
Yes,
Yeah,
use
questions
Slack.
in Slack. I'll be in Slack.
All right, next up, Lucas, on privacy.
Using your
Yeah.
All right, I've got 10 slides and 4 minutes and 30 seconds. You can time me, should be 33 seconds per slide. I'm going to talk about privacy. The dilemma we have is that community health metrics necessarily interact with individual developer metrics, and individual developer metrics have privacy implications. Going to your issues, SJ, when it comes to academic performance, this is right in the heart of those privacy issues. Let me call out the contribution attribution item goes right there. What are the risks? First of all, our work as open source developers can become a force for surveillance. And I need to call out and call us out that in our influence on the world in the last 30 years of open source, in some ways we have contributed to the loss of privacy. This is an issue both actively when we create surveillance and passively when we fail to create compelling private alternatives to privacy invasive tools. There are legal issues. GDPR puts very clear limits that are much more progressive than many of us are used to. In particular, even in a commercial context, a manager has limitations on how they can use individual performance metrics. There are also state-level limitations in the United States. 50 states, more territories than that, wide variety of issues. And GitHub's terms of service and other terms of service documents can put legal limitations on what we can do. There are product issues. Users are often happy to trade privacy for convenience, as we all know, and this creates difficulty for us when it comes to passive surveillance, or ways in which we contribute to surveillance passively by allowing products that are more compelling, not the ones that we're shipping, to become more popular. We need to strive to create compelling products that enhance privacy. And we can enhance surveillance, we can increase surveillance when we allow invasive products to become more popular by meeting user needs in ways that we don't. So what are our strategies? We can rise above, we can seek to rise above the fray and be pure. And we have two ways of doing that. One, we can stick to aggregate metrics. This is what GDPR suggests, And if you do that, you know you're good. Also, we can create metrics that would invade privacy if they were available to the public, but that are only available to the individual whom they concern. I call these mirror metrics. A strategy for making mirror metrics available is to allow people to share their own personal metrics. For example, you can share your Fitbit data, but by default, it is not shared. This also counts opting in. Whenever you create a metric that would be invasive, but the developer can opt in, that is one option you have. However, we've seen with EULAs in terms of service that opting in is often a technique for invasive stuff, and we shouldn't hide when that is the ultimate impact of our work. Or we can not rise above the fray. We can get into the mess, and we can deal with realities. Developers may want to shed privacy. We shouldn't try to force purism on them. There's a lot of information out there. The reality is the reality. Here's my recommendation. First of all, keep away from behavioral metrics. There's a lot of information out there, and you will see in commonly used commercial products metrics like the standard time of day, typical time of day for commits by a developer. So a manager may be getting reports that say such and such a developer makes a lot of commits at 1 in the morning. That is a thing that is easy for us to keep away from. What's good kudos fly in the face of GDPR. And I don't think that there is a community consensus against kudos. I think almost all developers are fine with that. So I recommend, to the extent that you are going to avoid best practices, aggregate metrics, that you adopt kudos. Last of all, mirror metrics or opt-in metrics, you should ask the developer. By the way, I'm at 5 minutes and 10 seconds now. I recommend that we add a checklist item to the metric quality checklist to do a privacy review. I think that it probably would have an impact on some of our thoughts on in the metric review period at this moment. And that is it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucas. And next up we have Kayla.
Hello, I'm Kaylee Champion, and I'm presenting to you some work that was published. I'll just leave it actually on the previous. There we go. Some work that was published with the IEEE in a software engineering journal, but I want to pitch it to the Ospo folks in the room, as well as to the metrics folks in the room. Some of you have seen me present this work, and thank you for your kind attention once again. So I want to suggest a way of thinking about metrics with respect to digital infrastructure. And we all kind of came together, I think, in response to Heartbleed, but also since then, we've been thinking about supply chain, we've been thinking about SolarWinds. And I want to think about how our digital infrastructure can sometimes have flaws in it that we find it difficult to see. And this kind of exemplifies maybe that for us. And this suggests kind of a model or an expectation that we might have of infrastructure, and we're going to go from model to metric to insight in this talk. So we might expect that the roads that we drive on the most often, the most important bridges over the most traveled areas, will also be the strongest, best maintained, the most inspected, and so on. But unfortunately, what we find out is sometimes that doesn't happen. In fact, sometimes a bridge can be better than it needs to be. That might be maybe some wasted effort. It might be beautiful. It's not a problem. Sometimes that bridge might be as strong as it needs to be, but sometimes it might be neglected. So this turns our kind of common sense expectation of infrastructure into a model, and we can use metrics then to see how our infrastructure is performing with respect to that model of expectations. This uses an approach called underproduction as an area of potential risk when our importance is high along that x-axis there, but our quality, relatively speaking, is fairly low. So I used this model to analyze a body of digital infrastructure. The body I chose was the Debian project, so about 22,000 packages, and I looked at about the history of resolution of about 500,000 bugs. This is the method that I applied. So we have this body of digital infrastructure. We have a measure of quality. For me, that was bug resolution time. Identify a measure of importance. For me, that was usage. Specify a relationship between quality and importance. You saw that in the model with the dotted lines, which is high quality, high importance, high quality, moderate, low, low. And then test for deviations to find relative underproduction. So look for your trouble spots, look for your areas of risk by looking for underproduction. All right, so what I found overall, quality measurement, especially using this bug data, was difficult but doable. There's not a lot of consensus in software engineering about measures of quality, unfortunately, which is a whole separate talk. But I also found that underproduction is incredibly widespread in Debian, which is very unfortunate, given that it serves as one of the backbones of the web and the cloud. So this is a heat map of the per package analysis. The count is number of packages, and you can see there's kind of an intense area of kind of dark color here, and that's where a large number of packages cluster together that are high usage, low quality. That's underproduction, that's infrastructure risk. This is another version of that same data. It's reflecting the approach that I used, which uses a Bayesian technique, and that means that everything is kind of a distribution rather than point data. But again, the high-level result is you look at this zone here of underproduced packages is very intense at that tail, and that's really a problem. All right, I have a list of the packages that we found to be most underproduced overall, and when I presented these results to the Debian community, they were super interested and super engaged. The community found this this kind of approach to be very insightful and helpful. So taking this back then from the sort of metrics into the insight back to the community, I think was a really great win for this project. All right. So what we're doing next with this technique that I've given you an extremely fast overview of is applying this technique to a much wider range of projects. 22,000 is a tip of an iceberg, and it's only looking at the distribution level, right? So everything exists in an ecosystem. You can go upstream, you can look at other distributions, you can look at a specific range, like you could just look at Python, you could look at, I guess, different languages. There's a number of directions one could go. We're continuing to validate this measure by comparing it to those outcome results. And we want to understand then what are the processes in those communities that tend to drive this neglect, and how can we identify those factors and then help those communities to intervene before things go wrong, before we get another heartbleed. So this is my invitation to the metrics community. Let's collaborate, let's work together. You see that this is a little bit of I'm a computational social scientist, so I'm coming at this from kind of that academic perspective, but I'm very open to collaboration. And here's some of my contact details. Like several of you, I was very generously supported by the Sloan Foundation in this project, but I also want to shout out to the community whose efforts to make this data available made this work possible in the first place. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next up, we are continuing with our talks. Did you want to say something? No? Okay. All right. We have now coming up building metrics models based on the state-of-the-art best practices by Shoya, who you already heard about this morning, and King. And let's see if I can figure out the audio.
Everyone, I'm so thrilled to have this opportunity to give this talk on CHAOSScon 2021. So together with Kim, we'll present the topic building metric models based on the state-of-the-art best practices. So as a student who has over 2 years of experience in open source, I will first talk about the characteristics of an excellent community combined with some of the best practices from the open source industry that I observed. And Kim will then present a framework of open source communities based on CHAOSS metrics and how to find the connections to build metric models. So what are the characteristics of an excellent community? The first element is people. There is a classic onion model to describe roles in open source, from a user to a contributor to a committer, and even become PMC leaders. We can simply look into the contributor and maintainers field. So many communities will require contributors to sign a CLA or DCO. It's more of for the sake of the community to avoid intellectual property conflicts when contributing code. And also during the community participation, the code of conduct should be clarified and be complied. And there are some other social norms that are predefined because each community is like an independent village with its own social culture that requires contributors to do their homework first, to learn the basic questions in advance, like the basic for WWH questions, instead of just stumbling. This also requires maintainers to take enough patience and responsibility. The best practice here is the Apache way. I list some of the points about making the community based built on trust and consensus. By summary, the people in a good community is respect and responsibility. People should show respect to each other, be responsible, and a core guiding principle here is diversity and inclusion. Let's then look at the organization perspective. If we divide the community structure from open or closed and led by individual or led by company, we will have a two-dimensional quadrant with 4 governance types. So the Apache Foundation is an open and successful community led by individual developers. The governance principle is transparent and meritocracy, etc. While most of the contributors in CNCF comes from companies. Company could lead the direction of the community while it's still openly governed by the foundation. And the openness can be influenced by the strategy of the company, like Android, MongoDB, etc. They allow users to participate in, but the project is controlled by maintainers who from the company. And the structure also evolves as the community grows. Like the picture on the right side, with a single project, roles are simply contributors, maintainers, and owner. And with multi-project to govern, a technical committee as known as TLC will be set. With a certain number of projects, it becomes a foundation governed model. And aside from TLC, now we also need user committee, marketing committee, etc. And now the foundation always form a board of director team to lead the strategy level of decisions. And the third characteristic is development. The development workflow in open source is actually the agile model. release early and fast iteration. So an efficient collaboration workflow and even automation tools are important. Frequently occurred concepts here are DevOps, aka development and operation, and to assure the quality in the same time, and CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous delivery, and continuous deployment. Let's now look at a project named Reproducible Builds. It's a set of software development practices that create an independent, verifiable path from source to binary code. The key words here are reproducible and verifiable. It's a part of the chain of trust by promising identical results are always generated from a given source. That is, you can always produce exactly the same binary code. It allows verification that no vulnerabilities are introduced into the component. So open source component security is a critical topic during development. It suggests on the process of releasing and delivery, like Fedora. The release engineering philosophy of Fedora is repeatable, auditable, definable, and deliverable. So how do other practices do? How do they do when measuring the community? We can see 3 examples. Apache looked at it from community development and community governance. Community development, where code, license, and copyright, release version, and quality are the elements that are highlighted. And community governance, where it looks at the community consensus and independence. And CNCF divide the maturity of projects to 3 levels: graduated, incubating, and sandbox. And this is voted by CNCF TLC. And one of the basic requirements is to achieve and maintain a CI best practice badge. So how does the CI badge evaluate the project? It focuses on the security perspective. Looks at the some basic elements like website, license and documentation, and change control, the vulnerability and bugs, quality and test, and so on. So to have a conclusion, we can see, despite of different focus and dimensions, the elements and practice are highly overlapped actually. It's why we need to integrate them and read them up as metrics. This is how I look at CHAOSS, an open source community itself, and for how to make a better community. So now Kim will talk about more about a framework and metric models.
Thanks to Xiaoya for sharing. I'm Kim from China. I will continue to share our insight-based measurement framework for open source community and how metrics are connected to form a model and support this framework. The first is our measurement framework, which is divided into 4 layers. I will analyze it from the bottom up. First, at the bottom is the awareness and culture of the community participating. Excellent participate makes excellent communities and excellent projects, such as respecting others, talk to the chief, show me the code exact. Second, The middle is the behavior of the community citizen. In the process of the governance, development, and the operation after they have good awareness and culture. There are 5 dimensions. At the bottom is the base data information, including one person's metadata, which is when, who, and what information generated by the behavior of the community participant in the community as a common work group of the CHAOSS community. At the top left is the content related to the governance of the community. It includes organization, event process, and specification. The effect of active governance is more diversity and inclusive. And in the middle is how community development, process, and the operation, which can better support the development process, and how community grows and evolves. The process of the development is the workflow of the Git, and at the end of the process is continuous improvement, which is the means of the CHAOSS project. That's the meaning of the CHAOSS project, to help the communities continuously improve from the behavior, process, and to the better future. Third, on the up layer, there are excellent characteristics of the products and the project produced by the community participating. Communities' characteristics of organization are open, transparent, diversity, and inclusive. Outstanding feature of the project is competence, spirit, and complete delivery. The content of this section is also related to the risk domain of the CHAOSS metric. The value present by the communities at the top. The value present by the business, the value of the organization, the value of the individual people, person, and the content of the value work group of the CHAOSS is exactly the same. All the process, the results in the big house are mirrored. The following slide shows the metrics that have been released by the current activity. I have drawn the chart for it. We can match the metrics on the previous slide page. It is a pleasure that the metrics I contribute are also included. We also mentioned that measurement is not a goal. It aims to continuously improve and build a more compliant, creative, diverse, and inclusive community, and involve more developers. The current indicators are quite complete, and we are constantly improving. Too many indicators will bring problems. How should I look at them? Which indicators? So we need a model that makes it easier for people to understand the health of the project. Before starting the model, we need to think about how the metrics are related to the model. There are some of my thoughts which I welcome to discuss. We are looking for links between the indicators, and I think about the following links. Chronological, inclusion, logic impact, and no connection. The chronological is easy to understand. It's similar to the upstream and downstream process of the pipeline. In the following example, open issue should be followed by the issue comment. The inclusion relationship is that the measurement period contains many small operation periods. For example, processing a period of the issue must include in the comment period and the label duration. The logic relationship is not a direct append relationship. Instead, a metric change may bring another metric change. For example, the large number of the issue comments, the more different people may join the community and comment, but only one person may comment. So it's possible consequence, but there may be strong or weak links. The last one, two metrics that have no relationship. At least for now, we don't see any factor that affect each other, such as license complaints and vulnerability pending. The simplest relationship in this is chronologic and inclusion. Based on this, I tried it first. I just participated in the CHAOSS project and found the simple Git workflow, simplest Git flow to do it. I think linked the metrics that have been discussed in the issue and request. You can see the relationship between the elder and the inclusive, and this is output would also contribute to the CHAOSS. Then I thought about the relationship between the issue and request, which is that I did this year. Therefore, so the following model is corrected. I linked the issue and pair through the indicators of the branch. Because the request starts from the issue. No matter the issue is requirement, function, feature, or bugs, an issue should be opened first. Then the request merge and the issue close. That purpose another metric relate issue associated with the request. A complete Git development workflow model is generated. Now, we're glad that we have established the metric model work group. We can explore more models together. There must be logic relationship in the metric model work group. They are also very interesting. We welcome you to join the metric model work group for discussion, and welcome more people to join the CHAOSS community. We will have conclusion of the idea together. Better appreciate the CHAOSS community and giving me this opportunity to share. I hope you enjoy it. We can grow together.
Thank you very much, Shoya and King. If you're watching on the stream, we appreciate everything that you just shared with us. Next up, we have Sean Goggins, who is going to speak on a complex web of open source software dependencies in Risk.
Are we over time?
We're right on time.
Okay.
Yeah, at least I think so.
We removed a break and now we're on time.
Yeah, we're on time. I did some magic with the schedule. Sorry to confuse you all.
Canceled vacation, so we're on time.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I just want to make sure everyone gets to lunch on time because
All right.
I'm hungry.
Well, I'm going to keep this brief. Try to keep
You
it
can
under
take
the.
your 10 minutes.
I don't think I need it.
All right.
What we really want to communicate from the risk working group is that a lot of times in CHAOSS, we have a problem, we understand it, we know of a range of contained solutions, and we go about building metrics and developing tools for those metrics to reach those solutions. When we started into the dependencies world, it was a lot like the La Brea tar pits. Or how many people have thought, I just want to stream something on the internet. I want to stream a show. And first you have to figure out what channel it's on and what all the channels are. And you end up finding this giant array of channels. Well, we had a similar experience with the risk working group, where when it comes to understanding dependencies, the OSSF, the Linux Foundation, there are a lot of different projects doing many different things from different perspectives to understand software dependencies. And there wasn't one way, and getting our heads around exactly what the problem we were trying to solve was a big part of our process. And that hasn't been my experience in other CHAOSS metrics working groups that I've participated in before. And Sophia Vargas, who's here, played a key role along with Kate Stewart, Dwayne O'Brien, David Wheeler, and the other people named back on this slide, and just really sifting through this very complex array of tools. And we ended up with these themes. We want to understand if our project is secure, if it's safe, and how do we measure dependencies. That was the big one, because there are a lot of tools out there that measure different dimensions of dependency. And the biggest thing not being looked at is how can I use some dependency that's fundamentally unsafe if I can build something trustworthy around it? And how do I handle it if a lot of my application's functionality actually derives itself from dependencies? Also designing so that a mistake isn't the end of the world, and then ultimately measure dependencies. And the dependency problem looks like this classic XKCD model, where there's some random project from a person in Nebraska. I want to point out that XKCD is calling out Nebraska.
Go Nebraska.
Been maintaining this since 2003. And in general, this is a list of the categories of risk that we look at. And so dependencies is just one dimension of the risk working group's way of looking at things. To give you an idea of the array of things that we looked at, talked about, went through to understand dependencies, each of these links, which are available in the slides, is one way of approaching dependency risk in open source software. And so we sifted through all of those and came back to these questions to define, what are the indicators of dependency risk? How can we quantify them? What can we measure? Does time matter? In some cases it does, sometimes it doesn't. And what's the value of any particular dependency metric? Oops. And so we used the goal question metric process that has been essential in the CHAOSS project to define two metrics so far. One is upstream dependencies for my software, and the other is lib years. And so in the case of lib year, I'll just use this brief example. Our goal was understanding the scope of dependencies in a project. So, and then identifying the higher level dependencies. And then the question is, what is the age of the project dependencies compared to the current stable release? I will not go through the detailed description, but you can think of it this way. You can look at it at a project level and understand how out of date each individual dependency is. You can also look at it at an Ospo level and say, what's the total number of lib years a particular project is out of date? And across all of those projects, which dependencies are most important? Say I have 11,000 projects in my Ospo. Which are the dependencies that are that place me at the highest risk? So you can use lib year to get a coarse-grained view. So instead of looking deeply into 11,000 projects, you can focus intently on the 50 or 500 dependencies that pose the most significant risk for you at this time. This is just another picture of all of the different ways that we looked at risk from the perspective of people and the tribal knowledge that exists within projects, the money that exists to invest. How maintained is the project? Is somebody keeping track of your dependencies? I know we're writing code fixing bugs, but you still have import statements and libraries that you're using. Who's checking to make sure that that's happening? Test coverage is obviously important. Fit for purpose. So a medical device has a much more stringent set of controls on it, perhaps, than a website. And then, are there any export restrictions? Obviously, there's a list of countries we can't use dependencies from. And at the end of the day, thanks in large measure to Sophia's driving us towards a goal. Okay, so what can we measure? We sorted through all this stuff, and we came up with a list of what we call our minimum viable metrics. And so it's just listing all of the dependencies that exist in your project. And we can use other CHAOSS metrics. When we identify the 50 oldest ones, perhaps, we can then use other CHAOSS metrics to assess the health and sustainability of those projects that we're dependent on. And how many times is a dependency referenced in a particular ecosystem? I mentioned that under lib year, but there are other metrics that we're going to develop specifically for that. Lib years, which is developed, vulnerabilities downstream, So are we causing other people problems by being out of date on something? And we're also implementations of OSF scorecard, and then a matrix of known vulnerabilities. So the piece that sort of intersects with security and dependencies is vulnerabilities database and known software vulnerabilities. And so that's sort of an orthogonal cross piece that we can build a metric around. These are our questions. Thank you.
You have 5 minutes if you want.
Sophia, do you have anything that you would want to add?
Sure. Should I get closer to the mic?
You can.
I can just talk loudly, but I want to think about the live stream.
Good idea.
I think I feel like you mentioned kind of this up front in terms of figuring out the swamp.
Yeah.
We're still kind of in constant discussions with that because I think the biggest issue that we're facing right now is that there's definitely a data we have versus data we want problem, especially in the space of dependencies, where a lot of things we're focus on package managers because that's the data that we have available to us, where in reality when we're talking about dependencies, it could be anywhere from infrastructure to people to financing to a broader interpretation of how you might even define a dependency. So I think for sort of the next level out in terms of how we're going to explore metrics and continue to develop this is thinking not just about what we can actually measure, which is what we focused on initially, but in a perfect world, what we should be measuring to actually make this more of a meaningful evaluation. So there's a quick tidbit, but then we can go to questions.
And I don't think we were told we don't have time for questions.
Yeah, you have time.
Oh, okay. Where were the questions?
I see one in the back.
So this lib year, that's a very fascinating metric. The way I hear it, it seems to assume that the older the dependency, the riskier it is.
So
how do you map that though onto this idea that there are some things that are done and don't need to be and by design aren't updated very often?
Sure. I mean, I'll add it, and then Sean can add. So the question is around the time duration of lib years and whether or not older things should be considered more or less risky. Sean has actually been talking to a few folks that have implemented this metric in slightly different ways because of that ambiguity, where we were initially debating between just overall age versus age of last stable release, which doesn't necessarily mean the most current, and essentially acknowledging if there's a better way to track what is actually still a stable and secure release versus just the time. So it's definitely an approximate, and we've seen a few different approaches to try to make it more aligned to how that individual organization evaluated risk in their own context. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just that the metric specifically states the most stable release, so you go backwards from there. And if you're at the most stable release, at the most recent stable release. And so technically the way the metric operates is whatever the most recent stable release is, and if that was 30 years ago, that's your and if you're that's where you're at, it's a lib year of 0.
Yeah. I mean, I think the side comment here too is another element of discussion in our working group is what is the best, sort of the easier ways to bring in more context around, say, weighting, sorting, and evaluation. So we can enumerate everything, but do we know what's more or less important, has more or less impact, more or less ability to address, and other things that might actually factor into someone's individual risk assessment. And so I guess that's sort of that question of the data we wish we had and expanding it on, because I think just enumerating a set of dependencies is a great starting place, but it can often be very overwhelming and unclear what actually has the biggest potential impact to take down my system, tool, app, or whatever it is. So
I'd just like to point out real quick that the live year metric is part of the next release, which means there is a public comment period right now. So if you wanted to comment on the metric,
which ends today, I think.
Oh no, it's just a.
I'm going to reiterate that on the live stream. Kevin in the back just mentioned that this metric is still up for review. So if you have comments, please let us know.
It's in Slack too.
It's in Slack? Okay, great.
And also like maybe announce when your meeting is.
Every other Thursday? I think it was supposed to be now, so.
Yeah, every other Thursday at 2 p.m. I think.
Yeah. Hey, we met now.
Yeah, we're 2 p.m. Central Time. Actually, yeah, we're right
You
in the
just
middle
came
of the
to a
risk
risk
meeting
meeting,
as
yeah.
we speak. So.
US Central. Yeah. Awesome.
No,
Well,
again.
thank you very much. We have one more talk. If you in the back would like to sit, there are plenty of seats here in the front. Feel free to come up.
Actually, for the live stream, the room is totally filled, but there's a few seats right here that have seats for the win.
All right, thank you, security.
Reminder of t-shirts.
Okay, yeah. Reminder, we have swag in the back. If you want t-shirts, talk to Matt. We want to give them all away, so just please let us know, and we're happy to accommodate you. This one is Anita Human, so 3, 2, 1, go.
Hello everyone, my name is Anita Human, and today I'll be introducing the CHAOSS Diversity, Inclusion, Open Source Badging Initiative. A little bit about me. I am Anita, a software developer and developer advocate at Kivano, a founder member of the CHAOSS Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Badging, a technical writer, and I love cats. Alright, CHAOSS DEI badging from there to here. As of 2019, open source projects often consisted of mostly male, white, male, and English-speaking software developers. But if you observe closely, you see that the open source ecosystem is moving towards a more diverse and inclusive environment. And that is where the CHAOSS community comes in. The CHAOSS community helps to track community health analytics for open source softwares. And this project started in 2017 at the OSSNA. And since then we've had several working groups with a long list of metrics to track, and also a number of community-centered initiatives. And we frequently have low-structured, relaxed calls almost every weekday. The CHAOSS Badging and Launch. The CHAOSS Badging was created to foster positive diversity and inclusive practices in open source, and is focused on technical open source events. For now, the open source badging is a community-driven development that is made up of a committed team of volunteering professionals, where event organizers get to apply their events for a badge. At CHAOSS Badging, we measure quite a number of metrics. We track quite a number of metrics, such as the code of conduct of an event, where we ask questions like, how does the code of conduct for an event support diversity and inclusion? We also have a metric for diversity access tickets, where we ask questions such as, how are diversity access tickets used to support diversity and inclusion for an event? We also have a metric for family friendliness, where we ask questions like, how does enabling families to attend together support diversity and inclusion of an event? We also have a metric for speaker demographic, where we ask questions like, how well does the speaker lineup for an event represent a diverse set of demographics, and can it be improved in the future? We also have a metric for attendee demographic, where we ask questions like, how diverse and inclusive are the attendee lists? And all these metrics are what come together to hold the badge, the CHAOSS DEI badge. So you might be wondering how much have we acquired over the years. Since we started the CHAOSS Diversity, Equity and Inclusion badging, we've had over 30 events that have been issued badges, and 13 applicants so far since last year. and 13 applicants so far. You might be wondering how the CHAOSS Diversity, Equity, and Inclusive Initiative works. Well, it's simple. The organizers of an event are expected to apply for an event badge for either an in-person event or a virtual event, and they do this by filling out the form. And upon filling that form, the GitHub, an issue is automatically created on GitHub, and the badging bot welcomes the applicants or the users and immediately assigns reviewers to this particular issue. 2 reviewers actually. The reviewers then come in and fill out the reviewers come in and fill out the review checklist according to the forms which the applicants have filled, and ask questions if necessary, and then incorporate the new information which align with the checklist into the application form. And once this is done, the badges are generated and must be accepted by the event organizers or the applicant. So the next step for CHAOSS DEI badging, we have a release cycle of 6 months. So the next release for CHAOSS DEI badging is going to be November 1st, version 3, and we hope to have increased the requirements of the CHAOSS DEI badges. So we're definitely going to increase the checklist for each applicant, and also we're looking to expand into the project badging space. So we're not going to be reviewing only open source events this time. We're also going to be reviewing open source projects as well. And also we're planning on working on consistent outreach to open source communities, because the open source the CHAOSS badging initiative is really new, and not a lot of persons or a lot of communities are actually aware of this project. So we hope to expand our outreach by reaching out to more open source communities. And finally, we're looking to provide more badges. Of course, with more applicants or with consistent outreach, we're definitely going to get more applicants, which means we're definitely going to be issuing out more badges. So you should also anticipate that. Since we started the CHAOSS badging last year, we have had contributors from Google Summer of Code 2020. We've had interns from Google Season of Docs 2020. We have 4 maintainers so far, and a number of reviewers and local interns, volunteers, and many more. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any suggestions and questions regarding CHAOSS DEI badging, please do well to drop them or ask them, or you can also apply to become a reviewer at the CHAOSS Diversity and Inclusive badging using the links provided, or you can apply for a badge for your event or your open source project using the links provided. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita, for joining us virtually and sharing the work that everyone has done in the DI badging. We are at the end of our half-day program today, so I have a few thank yous that I want to share with you. Thank you again to our sponsors for helping us put on this event: the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Google, Bitergia, and Red Hat. Thank you for the Linux Foundation for providing the space and for providing all of the infrastructure around this event, for making our life really easy organizing this. Thank you to the organizing committee. There are many of you in this room today. There was a lot of work putting together the event and putting out the call for papers, presentations, participation, whatever. And having the schedule and everything, putting together the website, the live stream, having all the technology in the room. This was the first CHAOSScon that we actually live streamed and had this mix of virtual and in person. So afterwards, I'd love to get your feedback, how you think it went, and how we can improve it for the future. So thank you everyone who helped with this. And also thank you to the speakers. I really appreciate you sharing your time, your thoughts, your experience with us. Thank you to all the international speakers who English is not their first language. I really appreciate that you are working with us to share in this experience. And the lightning talk speakers who spontaneously shared some thoughts as well. And thank you to everyone who came today. Thank you to everyone on the live stream who tuned in today. So just a big thank you to everyone. After the program, I know we have in the Slack some coordination about where to go, and then there is the underground tour at 3 o'clock that some of us are going to. So if anyone wants to say something about food, whatever, the official part of today is closed. Thank you again, and now we can go. Here's your send-off.
So how many people plan to join a group for lunch? And have all of you indicated their preference?
No, they have not.
Yes.
I put a restaurant down. You put a new restaurant down? Marination.